Hello, good morning, and welcome everyone to today's Brand Innovators Livecast. Once again, I am David Teicher, the Chief Content Officer here at Brand Innovators, and we have a fantastic program for you today, covering one of the most important topics, if not the most important topic for our industry: diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a really special event with a phenomenal program. I'm truly thrilled to have you all tuning in. Thank you in advance to everybody who's going to be streaming with us today on Zoom and on YouTube. We've really got a great group of speakers coming in today with Discovery, from Johnson & Johnson, from North Face, from City Row, from Best Buy, and of course, all our wonderful moderators. So we're really excited to have everybody on board and participating, and everybody here in Zoom and YouTube land. Big thank you and shout out to all of our sponsors for supporting today's event, and of course, our speakers as well. Quick reminder, don't be shy. For everybody out there in the audience, please share your questions. There is a Q&A widget built in right here in Zoom. So we do try our best to get through as many of the audience questions as possible, and we allocate time during each Q&A fireside chat to get to those questions. So please submit those if you've got them. Reminder also, we will have this content, as we do with all of our virtual content, available for on-demand viewing, both on our YouTube channel and the on-demand section of our site. So we'll kick off in just a second, but I would be remiss if I did not give a little bit of a preview for our upcoming marquee tentpole program, Brand Innovators Vegas, live from CES, January 5th through 7th, featuring the CMOs of brands like Cadillac, MasterCard, Best Buy, senior marketers and C-suite leaders from T-Mobile, from Volkswagen, the CMO of Discovery, the CMO of Popeyes. It's truly an amazing program. Speakers from Lenovo, from Samsung, I'm so excited, from Pepsi, and many, many others. So if you're going to be in Vegas, please join us at the Four Seasons. If you are going to be at home or elsewhere around the country, you will be able to stream that content, and we are going to kick off the year on a super fun and impactful note. With that, I would like to bring up our first speakers for today. We have Shireen Miller-Russell, the SVP of Ad Sales and Inclusive Content Monetization Strategy at Discovery, and our moderator, E.B. Moss, the journalist and founder of Moss Appeal. So let's welcome Shireen and E.B. to our stage.
Hey.
Hey, E.B., how you doing?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for including me. I'm going to try to add my fancy background. So let's see if I can do that.
All right. Love it. And we have Shireen here.
Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Really excited for today. So I will turn it over to you guys, and I will be back in a little bit when it's time to wrap.
Okay.
Awesome. Right. Thanks, David.
Well, I wish I could figure out how to do the background, but instead you have my fancy green screen. But you know, first time out of the gate here is a charm. Hi, Shireen.
Hi, V. How are you?
Good. Nice to see you again. You know, we had a really good little prep call, so I feel like I know you a little bit better, but I do know you as having so much information for today that is going to be really interesting to share. And I want to do two things before we toss it over to you. I'm a writer, so I like to tell them what we're going to tell them. And so today I want to share that what we're going to talk about will sort of have a flow. We'll talk about your definition of DEI, the value of that for business in general, specifically how DEI fits into our media and marketing landscape, or of course should fit in. We're going to offer some specifics that everyone watching can and should apply so that all boats rise, from content creation to ad strategies. So Shireen, with that, I know you have something special for us to see. Do you want to explain?
Absolutely. And thank you for that setup. You know, I have the privilege and honor and true responsibility of supporting the great original brand innovator, I think, and visionary Miss Winfrey on the Oprah Winfrey Network, and her intentionality around creating really inclusive stories that support and reflect our audiences with integrity and authenticity. And most of our audiences that are showing up and joining in for our primetime viewership and original programming are Black women between the ages of 25 and 54. And as we talked about on coming on off the heels of 2020 and all of the challenges from a social justice perspective, but overall the long-term epidemic of the erasure of Black women and honestly Black subjects in story across all of our mediums, Ms. Winfrey had a call to action. It was a call to action to normalize our lives and our truths in the stories that we see, as we so do at OWN. So this was from last year when we spoke with the ANA around the launch of our See Her platform, which we will be sharing the byproduct of that great relationship with everyone that's on this call today. Without further ado, I kick it over to Ms. Winfrey, who says it best, and we'll touch base right after.
You know, we're at an inflection point in this country. Black lives, seen in media and entertainment, need to be, more than ever, reflected with accuracy, with authenticity, and with integrity. We know this at OWN, and we've been living this intention since our inception. But there is an undeniable power that brands have to influence thought and consumer consciousness. And we have a responsibility to use the right language and, most important, the right imagery. It's always been important and now crucial to bring diverse voices and perspectives to all audiences. We need to honor the social responsibility of seeing and reflecting the experiences of all our viewers and consumers around the country. And to demonstrate respectability and be intentional in what you are showing. That's my favorite principle for living and for working. What is your truest intention? So I challenge you to normalize Black families, Black women, Black men, Black children, queer Black people, their hopes, their aspirations, their dreams as home buyers, as car owners, as dinner preparers, as moviegoers, to see the range of hues and hair textures as you celebrate beauty products and hair care. For all the research and resources required to put together a campaign, think about adding a new objective. Leverage your power and media time to rewrite and reimagine the American story, the full American story, where Black life is portrayed based on facts over stereotypes, where Black men are seen as dreamers and are engaged as active fathers, where Black families take road trips. We like road trips. Where Black women go for jogs. We like to jog. And Black life is normalized because we are so normal. And the common denominator in our normalcy, we love, we hope, we dream, just like all people do. So I appreciate your commitment to showing up for your clients, your viewers and communities in a more authentic way that better represents us all. Thank you.
Phenomenal. So before we actually dive into that and sort of parse out some of that inspiration from Ms. Winfrey, I do want to start. She talked about using the right words, and I will be using the pronouns she, he. And I should also say that our skew and talking points are primarily going to reference the target audience of OWN and the Oprah Network, which is Black women. But our conversation, of course, is applicable to multiculturalism, and diversity overall. And so with that said, welcome, Shireen, again.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here, and I'm just delighted. Obviously, as you mentioned, we had an opportunity to connect earlier last week, but I feel like this conversation is a critical one, and one that I hope really will reverberate and resonate, and that everyone that's participating and listening or listens thereafter outside of the live moment has key takeaways that provide for real implementation, as well as real thought leadership and adding to the thought equity around the conversations they're happening in their respective offices and projects, as well as in their own households, quite frankly.
Well, again, having spoken to you a little bit before, I know that you have some very specific takeaways, but let's start all about you.
Yeah.
It's all about Shireen right now, because you've had a pretty stellar career. You have sort of two titles, 2 million areas of responsibilities, let alone you're raising two sons. You do everything from educate marketers and create data-driven solutions. You drive ad sales across both OWN Network and Oprah.com. And you inspire intersectionality in content for both advertisers and the network itself. Holy moly, I think we need to bottle you. So,
Great for you to say thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your stops along the way, but how that also led you to personally really want to embrace and evangelize DEI a little bit more?
Absolutely. So, one of the unique things about my story and my history is I started off in media, truly sort of the legacy of my dad, who gave me my first job in high school, and he was in the newspaper business. And so I quickly learned how incredible the media platforms are to just inform agenda and conversation and drive dialogue, and really just sort of an information tool that would lead to me having an internship eventually with Time Magazine, that then led to a career in marketing, where I migrated from Time to Sports Illustrated, then eventually into television and the digital space at Viacom, where I worked closely on MTV and all of our properties there, MTV2, MTVU, and then begin to expand beyond that with VH1 and a few of the other networks. And then I got the call in 2016 to join OWN, and I was delighted to come and really did not know what to anticipate nor what to expect. But I had recognized that OWN was migrating into a place of content that was really rich and inspiring. And what occurred to me was, prior to joining OWN in 2016, where I would look up and be a part of a network pretty much, operated, managed, led, curated by that of a Black woman, that my entire 16 years prior to that, when I started my career, I had often assimilated in every room we'd be, wanting very much to fit into the space, feeling as though my Southern heritage, my nuance of being a Black woman raised in the South, the accent, the lack of information and access that I had in many ways made me feel inferior. And also, quite frankly, to look to the left and the right and around the room and never see anyone who really reflects your specific identity. There was this sense of pressure, I think, that I put on myself, in a sense of that I must fit into the space rather than make the space fit around me and bringing in my full expression myself. So I often say that, I came out at OWN, and I came out as a Black woman, fully expressed, fully comfortable being myself, because prior, none of the environments really allowed me to feel that voice and full expression was celebrated, reflected, and truly respected in the actual stories and the conversations that we were curating and developing on the platforms where I worked.
So at that time, did you see anyone else doing the kind of content that you saw at OWN?
No. And I like to believe that OWN was very much a pioneer. There were a few places, let me just say, that, there was some premium rich storytelling that you would see on some premium partners, like an HBO, for example. But in the space of ad-supported cable, no, there was not an intentionality where every show that you saw coming in was bringing in this really rich, thoughtful ensemble of Black cast members, both in nonfiction as well as unscripted, as well as scripted. And it really began with the arrival of Mr. Tyler Perry, and then migrating to that of what we would see with Ava DuVernay and the creators around Greenleaf, and then what we did with the creators around David Makes Man. So all of this rich storytelling was reflecting a nuance and a specificity of the Black experience in a way that did not lean into the existing tropes that existed, that did not perpetuate the negative stereotypes that often become dangerous in real life for folks to deal with. But what we heard from our audiences, which I personally could experience, was that, wow, there has been such a dearth and scarcity of my stories, with all of the richness, with all of the layers, textures, range, and expanded representations of the Black experience in one particular show. One particular narrative was showing range. But then you put an ensemble of shows together and have this really rich portfolio. And I believe that's what Ms. Winfrey does, as she often does, which is lead the conversation, start the movement. Because now you look up, that is not the case. We are not a bit of an anomaly. And that right now, more and more, which is a great thing, something we welcome, more and more networks and platforms are developing a richness of stories that reimagine the Black experience through a lens of accuracy and authenticity.
Well, in continuing to set the stage as you just did with the ecosystem 5 years ago and as we change today, I do want to do what we promised, which is continue to set the stage by defining DEI itself. I know that it feels intuitive. We've all heard that, but I do have to say that we've made a little bit of progress by evolving from DNI to now call it DEI. And Deloitte did an equity study a few months ago, and they said diversity and inclusion are key to our future, but equity is about the measurable results of how to fight system bias and racism. So everybody has their personal anecdotes or descriptions. Analogies is the best word of what DEI means. How do you describe it, and what does it mean in business?
Here's how I describe it. And we talked about this before, and it's not unique to me nor original, but it to me so personifies what that equity is all around, which is, at the end of the day, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion and equity is being asked to dance. And I take that, yes, and even step further and say it's the freedom. It's the freedom to be in the space, fully expressed in believing that as you are, your nuance, your aesthetic, your identity is received and it belongs. You belong where you are. And that there's a commitment to making you feel invited, included, and that you have ownership in the experience, and that your identity is, and that imprint is part of the ownership and will continue to be, and that you can influence. So taking that same analogy a little bit further, you influence the music that is played, you influence the food that is served, and more important, you feel as though your imprint on the dance floor as you're dancing is well received and celebrated. And that really, to me, is the evolution of where we need to become. And when people can feel fully free to show up in their full identity and expression, independent of, just as we talk about, race and heritage, but every identity and all of that intersectionality that comes together by way of orientation, by way of gender, by way of religion, full expression, and believing that you belong in the space is truly when we start to see things tip into a better direction.
I guess the good news is that we know that we need to do more. And there are a lot of stats. You and I talked about this, that we don't want to boil the ocean today. We have, 30, 40 minutes, and there's so much to talk about. But if we start with the reality check of what's going on in business and then move into how to fix that with, as Ms. Winfrey said, the power of media. So I want to throw a couple stats at you. Your journey and being an executive in media was not necessarily emblematic of a lot of Black women today. In the media industry, sadly, last year, although a lot of women left the workforce because of COVID, last year, there was a stat from She Runs It, their Diversity Best Practices Inclusion Index, that in the media and marketing industry, we only increased the number of Black people in our space by 5%. Last year, it was 13%. The good news is that those elevated to the executive office of Black people overall was 28% within our industry. So there's that. But, how do we continue to source, hire, and embrace more people of color in media and marketing?
It's a great question, and it's a critical question, right? So as we talked about before, I'm in ad sales. I think I can count on one hand, EB, within the entire landscape of the industry, how many people look like myself in leadership positions across our industry, which is tragic and sad on many levels. But I believe at the end of the day, there's obviously coming off of the hills of last year, and that stat makes a lot of sense, right? People felt this urgency. How do we populate our boards with more people of color? How do we diversify our leadership positions? And there was a sense of that we right now are being measured, and we want to be thoughtful about how we show up in the world. The truth of the matter is that works for a moment, right? And you start to see pivot swing a bit, but to sustain that, there has to be metrics of accountability, and there has to be a consistent sense of pressure industry-wide that says, what are you doing to create for opportunity? And more importantly, it can't just be opportunities at the entry-level positions. It has to be in the space of leadership, influence, and those who really have an imprint on the fabric of culture, in addition to the work that's performed, as well as the content and the stories that are released into the world, and more importantly, those who represent the trading desk and those who are trading on the media and evaluating where marketers should show up. And so, this is challenging to say, but I think it's right now until it becomes human natural behavior where everyone is moving through with that ethos and that understanding of how critical diversity, how much it benefits business, quite frankly, there should be incentive. And more importantly, I think some organizations have put that into place. And sadly, penalty, and not necessarily punitive in the sense of if you don't have people of color or women of color in position, but that there's an acknowledgement and there's a reporting that demonstrates where you lack. Because only then do I think really you get the urgency from C-suite and senior level management to put truly commitment to having the inclusion that's required. Right.
And that also impacts vendor, supply chain, et cetera. So hire diversely throughout the organization, and then find ways to welcome diverse talent in and offer that inclusive feel, being invited to dance in different ways.
And can I just compliment that by saying, Evie, and it's good for business. As I'm advising marketers and working with them on ideas and solutions, I remind them the universal, in many instances, when it comes to just capitalism and business, we all speak the language of green, which is that bottom line being at the end of the day, one where we're seeing the dollars increase. When you begin to speak to this audience, and more importantly, if you speak to this audience with sensitivity, awareness, and authenticity, they recognize that the right people are in the room to get it right. And by design, you get a vote not only in their confidence, but by the sense of where they show up with their consumer dollar. And that is critical. And we recognize that that's important to you in growing revenue, but also resonance with consumers and communities. Then you must begin to recognize that the investment in the room with the people that represent all of these unique different demographics really supports you showing up properly, accurately, and thus having the credibility to trade on for the purposes of your growth and advancement.
Yes. And I definitely want to talk about the opportunities that speaks to for advertisers, which again is one of your million areas of responsibility. But I want to go back to in terms of the power of media, which you sort of implied with offering diverse perspectives, content, faces, et cetera. And I'm going to read this because I thought that video was so powerful. So Ms. Winfrey said, media has a responsibility to influence thought and consumer consciousness. She says to us in the room, right? We're media, we're marketers, leverage your power and media time to rewrite and reimagine the American story, the full American story where Black life is portrayed on facts over stereotypes, and show up for your clients, your viewers, your communities. So I think that you guys did a survey that I read about how Black women feel they're being portrayed and the challenge of tropes or stereotypes. Can you talk a little bit about that survey?
Absolutely. So we have been in the marketplace and with our consumer audiences, quite often communicating with her, surveying her, polling her to understand what's important and what she wants to see as it relates to the narratives that we create. You come off of 2020 and you think about Black women being disproportionately impacted by the implications of COVID and how it was affecting her community. More importantly, the many new facets of working from home on top of caregiving and those responsibilities that she was looking to manage. And then beyond that, just the sense of just feeling depleted and exhausted when you layered on top of that, the social justice movement and the sense of seeing someone like Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd, all within a matter of like 90 days, which, while not new to her experience in this country, just felt like on top of a time where she was already under so much pressure and emotionally fatigued, this would also happen, which then creates for a level of more lack of security for her family, for her children, and for herself. And it was just an emotional overload and, quite frankly, traumatic. And she still had to show up in her community, in her office spaces, in her household, bearing the responsibility. So as we talk to our audience, over 10,000 women, about that experience and how that was reinforcing as well as redefining how she wanted to see herself in story, what came out is that she wanted to be in a place where she could see herself celebrated, rewarded, loved, honored. She wanted joy, because at the end of the day, the news media, on top of what she was seeing in a lot of her familiar stories, were no longer satisfying her and giving her the retreat and delight that she needed. Mm-hmm. And she wants to be reminded, quite frankly, about the things that she knows will instill hope. And that is seeing her love, seeing romance show up in her household with honesty and accuracy, seeing drama, but drama that is scripted for the purposes of delight and escape, as opposed to stereotypical unscripted drama that only promotes more shameful consumption of stories about herself. So guilt-free enjoyment. She wants to be unburdened. She wants to watch with delight and retreat and escape, but also knowing that part of that escape is into her absolute truth, and that the stories that we share reflect that absolute truth and give her the sense of she's loved, she's seen, she's respected, and she's celebrated here.
A whole person.
A full whole person, yes.
One interesting thing that I read also is that there is such a trope of portraying the Black woman as the strong Black woman. And, you think, oh, that's great. But what one of the quotes in your study said was that vulnerability is what makes people relatable. Like when I couldn't get my green screen up, vulnerability makes people relatable. And there's a lack of content that features the vulnerability of Black women. What does that do for promoting stereotypes? How do you break out of that? How do you advise content creators and even brand advertisers in developing imagery of women properly?
To answer that question, I think we have to think about the Black woman and her arrival since she first stepped foot on soil into this country, right, by her captors, and more importantly, in an institution of being enslaved. From her arrival, she was here to be in service to everyone else. Her strength and her resilience oftentimes is what allowed her to get through the ridiculous genocide that she was living through, right, in this country. So combine that with the evolution in generation after generation, she's often been seen as this monolithic, strong figure, almost superlative to that of the human experience. Oftentimes I would hear even in the space of the health industry that a Black woman will be denied pain meds because there's a sense of she's got the strength and her body can withstand more pressure, more pain, and thus be subjected to less resources for support and recovery. So that is a universal narrative that we must dismantle, but the way that shows up in story oftentimes, unfortunately, the way Black women have had to also operate is believing the circumstances and the situations that I find myself in, I have the perseverance, the tenacity, and the strength to get through this because I have no other choice. And that has been my story since, as I mentioned, my origins here. Mm-hmm. So it's critical that in telling story, if we're going to normalize and humanize the experience for everyone, well, those emotions of fatigue, those emotions of vulnerability, those experiences of pain are real. And to be able to show that emotional and mental imprint of trauma and stress and those feelings around it, afford her a space, and I apologize for the noises that are happening outside right now, but they afford her a space of comfort, of seeing herself in those spaces and knowing it does not diminish her full self. It does not diminish the resilience that is part of the human experience, but it allows her to see herself being told and reflected with the truth of the challenges that she's experiencing. And what we like to do is also create some delight and some wonder around that, and the idea that she can also recover and evolve, but we have to start in the place of truth. And, I once heard a quote that said, Black women are often thought of last, but who everyone comes to first. for the purposes of creating for resolution, for moving forward an election, for moving forward things that need to get done. Mm-hmm. And so at OWN, we like to say to her, you are first. And when you come here, we're creating a place for you to see yourself and delight in that, but also see your full truth and the full range of your experience.
So 2 quick things, because I want to, I told you we were going to boil the ocean. There's so much to talk about. But what you've done at OWN is you are, as you said, kind of have pioneered this space. You've created an ecosystem that enables women to be seen, Black women to be seen authentically and without stereotypes in every hue and every hair texture, et cetera. So that in and of itself is a guide, but you also created an actual guide, which is amazing. It's so comprehensive. And I'm going to have to take a sip of coffee because I got all choked up at the last thing you said. So I'll let you talk about this 5-page guide.
Absolutely. So, we work with marketers all of the time, maybe, and a lot of times they'll come to us and say, we have a campaign, we want to reach audiences, and we want to more importantly, we want to connect with Black women, and we want to, as we recognize, they're the CEOs of the household, they're the leaders of community, they're driving forward conversation in business, as well as really just as a collective moving forward culture and conversation. How do we tap into that in a meaningful way? And more importantly, how do we do it without getting canceled because we do it the wrong way? And I often say it first starts with, where are you pulling from? Who's in the room that can influence that imprint? And do you respect and listen to that individual or individuals for the purposes of allowing their actual Indigenous experience to drive the way you think about the conversation, the audience? But more importantly, if you don't, and you're looking to reach this consumer, you need a partner who can stand in the gap for you, a partner who is very much rooted in this insight, expertise, and can help you show up properly, accurately, and correctly, and more importantly, without offense or disrespect to the intended consumer that you're looking to connect with. And so what we've done is we want to really empower marketers with this tip sheet that we partnered with See Her. Dr. Natoki Ford helped lead with us, in addition to working with many of our storytellers, from David Makes Man to the teams from Array, Ms. Ava DuVernay's team. And we said, what do we do to get it right? How do we lean into the right storytelling? And what questions should every writer's room have, and every creative team be utilizing to say, did we get it right? Did we think about these things? Or did we lean into familiar and accessible tropes that actually continue to perpetuate those various stereotypes that we're looking to migrate away from? So this document asks everything around range and texture to how we show up from a gender representation point of view. Are we reflecting the queer experience with authenticity and accuracy? Black women, when it comes to their romances and their loves, does she appear in one way? Even if you're talking about a woman in a space of career, how does that show up? What role, what titles is she showing? And so this is a fabulous tool. We hope that everyone will continue to use it because it's thoughtful. And then more importantly, continue to engage with our teams when building creative. I will tell you, we had a conversation with a partner who will remain nameless just a few weeks ago, a couple days ago rather. And in the spirit of being in service, not only to our audience, but to that partner, we had to say, there were things about your RFP that did not work, that already were laden and dripped in bias. And knowing that, it's an acknowledgement. It's so critical that you have a partner, a credible partner at the table to help you mitigate what you already implied within the RFP. So, and that was an interesting conversation, but we also knew that we had to do that. And while some things may have felt offensive and challenging, even for me to consume, I realized that if I'm doing what I'm saying that I'm doing, and I'm helping to promote change and move forward the conversation, then I recognize that I am a change agent, and I have to be an activist on behalf of our audience. And I have to call out when something is not right and help make right what's wrong for the purposes of really supporting moving forward the narrative. And that's what See Her and our partnership around with the ANA and this tip sheet does. So we're going to provide this tip sheet to everyone, and it'll be available in the chat. And again, I really hope that everyone will utilize it and keep it close.
It's so good. And it's so thought-provoking. And I know that you, as you said, not just in RFPs, but sometimes you have a seat at the ad creative table. Is that right? And can guide and advise on best practices with good advertising creative.
100%. And we like to leverage, as I mentioned, we talk to 10,000 women annually as part of our research panel, and Black women specifically tell us. And we recognize it looks different regionally. And by way of just age demographics, there's different points of sensitivity that we're learning about. But more importantly, we're careful. And the same information and data that we're using to influence how we're going to tell our stories, we really make that available to our partners and say, let's help you get it right. What's the story that you're really looking to tell? More importantly, what do you want your audience to feel and engage with? And one of the things I'll often tell you, EB, is that marketers and partners chase ratings over meaningful and safe engagement. And if that becomes the metric on with which you trade, and you're only going to chase rating points, which again, we recognize scale is important, but sometimes you can find yourselves in environments that continue to support the limited range and experiences and reflections of the Black female experience in this country. And so we're often mindful to say to partners, it's not just about the creative that we build with you, it's about where that creative shows up and where are you investing and what type of experience do you want to evoke when you're talking to your consumer based on the environment of where your short form and your content shows up.
So staying on that advertising track for a second, so this is a big question. What role does big data play in accurate or inaccurate representation and finding diverse consumer groups? I know you have some thoughts on that.
I do. And here's the bottom line. Big data is flawed because at the end of the day, if the folks who are soliciting the information don't have a sensitivity and awareness about even some of the questions and the way with which the data is solicited, again, you can perpetuate the bias and the misrepresentation, because in fact, you're writing and developing, and we've heard this quite often, but in the algorithms and the information that's gathered, who's setting that up and who's soliciting that information? And is there an implication or a narrative that they already are aware of, or that they believe or subscribe to themselves that influences how the information shows up? So on some level, we still have to be discerning and thoughtful about the sources of where that data comes from. And more importantly, asking more questions about the solicitation of information, how many people of color, how many Black women specifically were reviewed. And then there's, within the Black experience, right? There's this diaspora. So it's just, there's the Black American experience, but then there's also at the end of the day, the nuances and specificity associated with that of the Black Caribbean experience, that of someone who identifies their origin specifically with being in Africa and how that shows up. And so we have to be thoughtful and sensitive to that and not, again, group everyone into one particular bucket and assume that becomes the overall data source and points for how we trade and move and develop our content.
So there are so many studies about the value of brands who embrace DEI and ESG and things like that. But it also seems intuitive that OWN and Oprah clearly do well by doing good, but you're also part of discovery overall. And I know that you guys have done some really great initiatives that helps you walk the talk. Can you talk about the company overall and advice for how people connect the dots from DEI to doing well?
Absolutely. So we launched this platform called Mosaic, and Mosaic has touch points across our entire organization discovery, from the hiring practices and the retention of people that we bring in that are underrepresented audiences, in addition to diversity in our suppliers and those with whom we're securing content from and developing content with. I mentioned Ava DuVernay, but we're doing a multitude of things with Will Packer and his team across Food Network, in addition to OWN. And that's just one example. But beyond that, even more when it comes to diversity supplier initiatives, who else are we looking to employ and bring in for the purposes of the different services that we do? And then our C-suite invested a significant amount of money into each of the networks having access to additional resources to tell more rich, diverse stories that go beyond what they're presently required to do in the purposes of engaging with their audiences and giving them room and range to take risk and tell more.
I'm sure that you shared your guide with all of your sister networks.
Of course, it is definitely part of our intranet portal,
Yeah.
and more importantly, something that we've celebrated internally. And we've continued, one of our key partners within our organization, who also helped set this up, Portia McCoy, was also very helpful in organizing our MCA, which is our Multicultural Association, which comes together, and we have these MCA Mondays, and we have dialogue, we have conversation. It's a candid, safe space for all of the employees to collectively talk about the change we wish to see both within the organization as well as our content, and then the larger universal sort of landscape. So it's been great. And as we continue to evolve, I think we'll continue to do the very same. So
Well,
in our new world, if you will.
I just, we can go on and on and on, and that sounds like a cliche, but it's so true. But just to leave it on sort of a fun and high note, water cooler chat during COVID was replaced by, so what are you watching? So I'm going to ask you, on or off? All right, how about off own? What are you watching?
So that's interesting, because I really do drink the Kool-Aid and love our content, and Saturday nights have become, and Friday are for co-viewing for both my husband and I, sort of our escapes when it comes to what we're watching on OWN and live television. But what I will say is we have started watching Handmaid's Tale, and that has been all too eerily close to a lot of the realities that we're seeing take place. So it feels like more of a horror for me right now than it does an actual like place of unburdened entertainment. But I am consuming it because I think it's such rich storytelling. In addition to that, we are also Succession. Like I feel Succession so influences our day to day in my industry, and feels like I sort of live in Succession in the sense of watching the industry and all the conversation and vernacular, which is inspiring. And then Insecure, love Issa Rae and everything that she represents.
Yes.
But a full circle moment for us in collective viewing in our household. As you mentioned, we have two sons, a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. I grew up watching Wonder Years in my household with my dad and my sister. And now I get to watch it with my husband and my 2 sons, and seeing it reimagined through the lens of a Black family is just so rich and so beautiful. So that's sort of our short list of content we're watching right now.
What a great list, and inspiring. And David, hello. I know you're back on. I need another 40 minutes, please.
It's the worst part of my job. I hate interrupting these amazing conversations, but I will say we will have you back for part 2. I mean, we have to. There's so much more to get into, and this was so inspiring and powerful. So I really appreciate both of you taking time to share with us in our community today.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you.
And thank you for doing this. Thank you for keeping the conversation alive and well. And EB, I look forward to us getting together in person and continuing the dialogue as well.
So long. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Shireen. Thank you so much, EB. We are going to keep the show rolling, but like I said, we can definitely get you back again for part 2. This is a conversation and a topic that we hope to really address in a big way, in a continuing way throughout the rest of this year, and of course in 2022 and beyond. So with that, we're going to bring up our next speakers. We have Lauren Rotolo, the Director of Creative Partnerships and Production at Johnson & Johnson, and our wonderful moderator, Stephanie Bone, the Global Chief Brand Officer at VidMob. So we'll give a virtual round of applause for Lauren and Stephanie, and welcome them both to our virtual stage. How you doing, Stephanie?
Hi, it's so nice to be here. Thanks for the warm welcome.
Oh my gosh, and Lauren, that I wish I was going to say, I was going to hope that's a virtual background, but I don't think so. I hope you're okay.
I'm okay, thank you. I said that I was going to be here, but I would happily do this. Brand Innovations is such an important organization, and really helps us bring together all of the marketers and content producers around the world. And so while I'm here at the National Institute of Health in Maryland, I did think that it was important for me to be part of this.
I mean, we appreciate that. I think it's the first for us. I mean, we are really excited for your conversation, and I'll bow out in a second, but I will say on behalf of us at Brand Innovators and everyone in our community, we wish you well. We hope you're doing okay. And we're excited for today's conversation. So Stephanie, I will turn it over to you. But thank you so much, for joining us today.
We also have a video producer, so we get more ratings when we're in the hospital, right? People.
It's all marketing at the end of the day.
All marketing, exactly.
Well, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Stephanie. I'm going to turn the virtual floor over to you, and I'll be back in a little bit when it's time to wrap up.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Lauren. It's so nice to finally meet you face to face.
So nice to meet you face to face. I'm so excited when we got to chat yesterday.
Yeah, and thanks for everyone who is on the line. This is going to be a really interesting and candid conversation that we'll have, and we'll chat for about 25 minutes and then go into a Q&A. Hopefully I'm technically savvy enough to figure that out, but just in case I'm not, or it's not an inquisitive crowd, I have like a cajillion questions, so we're good. Yeah, I learned when I recently did an event like this that it's best for any of our viewers who might be visually impaired to describe myself before I begin speaking. And Lauren, if I could ask the same of you. So my name is Stephanie Bone, and I work at a company called VidMob. We're a creative technology company, and really thrilled to be here. I have a background from Brand Innovators. It's blue. At the top, it says diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have brown hair. I'm a white woman, and I have a gray shirt on with a happy face because that's how I feel, and a gray sweater. Lauren, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I am Lauren Rotolo. I am the creative head of video creative for Johnson & Johnson. I have red hair. I am sitting in a hospital bed right now, which is not normal, but I am sitting right here. I have red hair, like I said, blue eyes, and I am wearing a black and white hoodie today.
I love it. We're very in sync.
Hoodie, I should call it.
Zip up hoodie. We're very in sync with our colors today.
Yes.
So let me do a little bit of bragging on your behalf, Lauren, before we get going. Lauren, for those of you who you don't follow yet, you should. But she is the author of a book called Unstoppable in Stilettos. She's an innovative marketing leader, as she mentioned. She's at J&J. Right now, she's been there for about 7 years, currently holding the role of Director of Creative Production and Partnerships. She's got a really cool career, having spent, I'm guessing, about a decade, if I add up all the years on LinkedIn, in entertainment, which
More than that. That makes me really old, more than that.
So she's been at the Jim Henson Company and TV Guide and Hearst. And then had a really interesting stint as the VP of Marketing and Publicity at a company called Dance On, and then is now at J&J. So she keeps very busy by day, but she's also moonlighting as an author and a TV and film producer and an inspirational speaker, and an activist and advocate for disabled people. And so it's just with great pleasure that we're here with Lauren today, and we're going to have a conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's funny, before we get started, Lauren and I hadn't had a chance to meet and have a proper conversation before, which is always nice before someone is interviewed. But I stalked her. I got her cell phone last night. I texted her and we had a little text chat. We realized we actually have quite a bit in common, in addition to like dozens of mutual connections on LinkedIn. We both spent about a decade in the entertainment industry. Amazingly, we grew up about 10 minutes from each other. I currently live in LA for the last 20 years, and Lauren is in New York, but we realized we are we're about the same age, and we grew up very close to each other, which is wild. And we share an obsession with Bagel Boss Bagels in Nassau County on Long Island. We both also understand what it means to live with a rare disease. Lauren lives this personally with a personal disability, which we'll talk about, McCune-Albright syndrome. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Myself, I have a 7-year-old daughter who has a rare disease called Rett syndrome. And so we, and as a parent, all of her struggles feel like my own struggle. So certainly understand a lot of the the experiences of having health scares, of course, but also feeling underrepresented for me on my daughter's behalf. But you, Lauren, you have this lived experience, and it's so powerful to be able to talk about this with an audience, presumably of people who don't have that same experience, and who want to understand how that can be applied to making the world and the corporate America and our businesses and our marketing fairer and more representative and accurate and respectful. So that's what we'll get into today. So the first thing I wanted to ask, we covered sort of your biography, but if there's anything that you wanted to talk about, like your career path, would be really interesting just to get to know you a bit. How did you think about your career trajectory? And at J&J, what are some of the things that you do day to day?
So my career trajectory really started when I was a teenager. I was very, what they would say, like precocious when it came to wanting to work. And I always knew that I wanted to be in entertainment and some kind of music or video or content, but I didn't really know what it was at that age. I just knew that I wanted to not be on stage, but to be backstage and to really put it all together. And so I was the first ever intern at the age of 16 at a local radio station called WDRE. You may remember it, Stephanie. It was like a local Long Island station. Yeah. And then I went to Hofstra University and worked for Z100. And if anybody knows where Hofstra is, it's in Long Island, and Z100 at that point was in New Jersey. And so I would drive 3 days a week, about an hour and a half each way to be an intern, not for free. Back then, everybody was a free intern. I know that times have changed today, but it was. And I just always knew that I wanted to create and just be part of some kind of entertainment. Like I said before, I didn't really know what that was. At first, I thought that maybe that was radio. But then that really spurred into more of PR and marketing and video. And I spent at TV Guide, really gave me the opportunity to see not only the behind the scenes of how television shows were made, but how the industry really worked. And I got to I'm a very big believer in trying and innovating and being the first at things. I am not scared of trying new things by any means. Just because it's true and tried doesn't mean that you need to use that all the time. Sometimes you need to think outside of the box and bring new things. And so we were really able to do that, put the first ever CD on the cover of a magazine, was able to sell 1 million copies in that week. And, it really was able to take what I learned at TV Guide and apply that then to Hearst Magazines, which was a much larger company, a much larger publishing company that had some of, and still has some of the largest magazines and brands in the world, such as Cosmopolitan, Marie Claire, Elle, Good Housekeeping, Esquire. They've acquired a lot more brands since then. But at that point, I was the director of promotions and really got to think about how do you apply television and entertainment into the magazines and vice versa. Because we were so highly fashion magazines and beauty, but really how do you take those brands and integrate them on TV and vice versa? And so we were able to do that, worked on Project Runway, created shows for Marie Claire and for Joanna Coles, and did a lot of stuff for Good Housekeeping. And, I really got an incredible opportunity to really do a lot of charitable give back at 17 magazine. It was so wonderful to work with children and with not children, they were teens, I should say, not children. But really, I learned so much from the editor-in-chief, Anne Choquette, and really, how do you combine the power of what's happening and how to apply it? At that point, it was just the beginning of social media. And how do you apply? We did this huge campaign for bullying, and it kind of like changed my trajectory of how I thought about things, and how taking what's happening in the media and in people's lives and creating programs, helpful programs around that. And I just love the idea of helping teens, because when you can change a teenager's mind or showcase to them that you're there, it really changes their trajectory for life. And so, when now at Johnson & Johnson, which is what we do all the time. And so it's in our credo. It's in, every single employee is invested in helping people. And so that's a lot of what I do. And we tell these beautiful stories of change makers and health change makers really trying to change that trajectory for health and for medicine today. So that's kind of where I am, besides my side hustles.
One of the things I'd love to dig into is spinning off of a conversation that was had in the last session. Shireen Miller-Russell from Discovery was asked for her definition of diversity. DE&I is a very fortunately trending topic, and it's very popular to talk about today. But I think lots of people come at it with their own kind of interpretations of what it is. And I love the way she thinks about it. And she said, diversity is like being invited to the party. Mm-hmm. Inclusion and accessibility is like being asked to dance. I recently interviewed another woman for a diversity and equity and inclusion event. Her name is Keely Catwells. She's disabled. She's fantastic. For those of you who don't, she runs a company called C Talent. And she thinks about it in terms of, diversity is having a seat at the table, but accessibility is being able to get through the door to the table. And, if we don't think about accessibility in those ways, then you may have hired all the right people, but if they can't get to the table to weigh in, it's not really maximizing the value of diversity. And so I'd love to know from your point of view, Lauren, how do you think about DE&I? How would you define diversity, equity, and inclusion or accessibility?
I think it's really interesting because it is such a hot topic today, and it's a trending topic. But I would say that it's a trending topic, not for all. And especially when it comes to the disabled community, what I say is, similar to like what Kat was saying, is that we are invisible. And so while DE&I wants to include everybody, they still don't. And I think that it's really important that when you really dig down and think about that, we need to not only allow people through the door, but create that door for them and visualize that door for them so they can be invited to that party and they can put on those dancing shoes or put on whatever they want to wear to the party, but give them access to it, or think about the access that you're going to provide. And that is where, change makers like myself, or change makers like Kat, or change makers like the Valuable 500 are really here to make that impact, because DE&I, while people are so impressed by it today, it is still closed off to a lot of people. And I would say that it is closed off, and we have not entered the room yet. And when I say we, I mean the disabled community. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's time for that to change. So we need to not only visualize the door that it will be open to people, but we need to also go into those communities and tell people that they can enter that door to be at the board table, to be at the party, because we are told so many times the word no. Mm-hmm. We live by the word no, and it's really more of a not no, you can't do that because we don't want you. We want to keep you safe. So no is like a safety word ultimately. And I'm sure, as you know, being a mom of a girl with a rare disease, it is safe. It's safer to keep her inside. It's safer to keep her with you at all times. And that's what you want to do because it's love and you just want to keep them safe. But when it comes to us living in the real world, whether you walk with crutches, or in a wheelchair or with a walker, which is honestly just a mode of transportation, or you have a rare disease, we need to begin taking the conversations and including this community outside of the doctor's office. And that's where it's really held. And, I call us the invisible community. And how do you make the invisible invincible? You need to give them the opportunity. You need to showcase that you care about them and that you see them. And I think that that's what's so important. I think that when we think about D&I, we need to start seeing people that, to be honest, have a different mode of transportation, and don't be afraid of it, and start including them, and it could be as big or as it's small, but just the fact, if you think about the word inclusion, if you're not including everybody, then you can't call yourself an inclusive company just because you're following what the media says. And I think that that's what we do, or just by who has the loudest voice. If we really are going to be inclusive, whether it be at the party or in the boardroom, we need to think about every kind of person that is a little bit different.
I couldn't agree more. And I think in order for us to make the invisible feel invincible, companies have to do a better job of anticipating. I'll just focus on companies because this is a business conversation, but I think it extends everywhere. We have to anticipate what the accommodation needs may be, and just do it even before there is a person who needs that accommodation. And it could be as simple as a type of a door handle. It could be as simple as, where, the height at which certain fixtures are set, or, making sure that the elevator is always working, or that there is a ramp. I mean, anticipating those things before someone arrives will, I think, get ahead of a person who needs those accommodations feeling like they're a burden. And that sort of eats away at that sense of invincibility. Would you agree with that? And if so, what are some of the things that you, I guess, personally have experienced that could have been better handled?
Well, I think that even before you think about, so like if you have a new building or you're building something, or even an existing building, what happens is, and this is kind of sad, is they say, okay, is the building ADA compliant? And the building may very well be ADA compliant, but the buck stops there. Mm-hmm. They don't think about the actual person that would use that ramp, that would open that door, that is going to be in the elevator, that needs to go to the cafeteria. They do it because they won't get their permits, or they do it because they want to say that they are an ADA compliant building. Well, buildings are not people. And so, because we're not brick and mortar and all of these things, we are actual people with feelings, with thoughts, with, just the same brain power as everybody else. We need to think about to meet people where they are first. I want people to say, okay, now I have that building and I have that accessible door. Now, how do I get those people inside that building? Because it's not just good enough to have a door where somebody could just push a button and it opens, because then what happens? Everybody uses that door, but it wasn't made for everybody, right? And so you have to meet them where they are, whether they be in school, whether they be in various different community outreaches. The same how when really DNA started with, the Black and Latin communities, and then the LGBTQI communities, is you went out and you sought out those people and you did campaigns, especially hiring campaigns for that. No one is currently doing outreaches for this community. If somebody happens to apply and they are the right candidate, then great. But no one is actively seeking it out, which is really sad. And
Do you have
therefore,
any
you can't
advice?
really say that you're an inclusive company just because you have, an ADA compliant bathroom or a lunch table or, whatever it may be.
Do you
I want
have
to see
any
people
advice
like
for
me on the
people?
walls.
Yeah, like, if there are, I'm sure many people on this call have open positions and they're trying to fill them. And they, I think there may be some eye-opening that we could do if you could share some advice on a good way to reach out to the disabled community, since that's specifically what we're talking about in this conversation, to make those opportunities be known and available. How can this group of people be more proactive about that?
I think that, similar, there's such discrimination in the workplace, and because there is, I think that you need to go out and you need to seek. So you need to go to those colleges, just like you would do any place else, but it needs to be part of your plan. So you need to say, okay, this year a lot of people during the pandemic and with Black Lives Matter, they made statements and they said, we're going to hire 10% more. We're going to hire 15% more, whatever it may be. They need to make those same statements within this community as well. And to say, yes, we are going to bring you to the table. We are going to seek you out. So whether it be, the government now, under Biden has created, disability in the workplace, all about equal access. There are so many groups, they could easily go to the ADA, right? And even though the ADA says that it prohibits employers from discriminating against employees or applicants, the problem is that they don't think about it. It's not top of mind. And so if it's not going to be top of mind, you're never really going to do that. So I would say is to go to your college campuses, go to disability schools. There is almost in every single district or in every single, large city, that there are schools that accommodate the disabled. There are schools and there are places where you can seek this community out. We are the highest unemployed community. I think it's something like 17% of people who are disabled are unemployed. Or actually they are employed. So if you think about that, that's a huge statistic. But the idea that when you hire a person that is disabled, they will value that more than any other employee, because what they will say is, you saw me, you heard me, now you're employing me. And that is such a huge change in their life, and they will always respect that. They will always want to give you the productivity that they know that you deserve because you believed in them. And so there are statistics that productivity is actually higher from a disabled person than a non-disabled person. And it is because the belief in who you are and that you actually said yes to them versus no.
So I think this is a really interesting time to pivot and talk about the sense of sort of vulnerability, owning your story, and living out loud and proud. And I think you deserve an immense amount of credit. I look at all the things that the content that you create and the platform that you've built on LinkedIn, which I think could be a really scary place for some people who have very personal challenges, whether they be disabilities or other things in life, to be honest about. And so what I often see is that, I'm guilty of it myself. I would show up at the office with my game face on and pretend that everything's perfect. I'm like everyone else. And, I don't have a disabled daughter, and all these things that just could bring some, embarrassment, or feel like they're going to be, pitied, or there's a stigma. And so they don't talk about it. And
Right.
so there's so much actually invisible diversity that we don't even know about because people aren't sharing their stories. There's a woman that I've worked with in the past, for 6+ months we worked together, and there were I could tell there were some boundaries that she was setting in her life, and I wanted to be respectful. And it took her half a year to tell me she had MS. And I was so honored and grateful for knowing that. And then we could sort of develop a plan so that she felt that, she was completely set up for success. But it was sad to me that I looked at it as a failing of mine, that I didn't create a safe enough space for her to be able to be open about that and proud about it. So that kind of thing inspires me to talk at least about my personal journeys. And I hope others do the same. I'd love to know, this is a long-winded way of asking, how has it been for you to sort of put yourself out there and talk about the stuff that bleeds out of out of your sort of corporate persona? And what advice do you have for people to sort of share the things, their differences that actually are of great value to companies?
Sure. So I think so it's twofold. So number one, I wasn't always, wanting to put myself out there. I was just Lauren, and I was happy just being Lauren and being very confident and like pushy. And, I'd always be that person, and never said, I am Lauren, a person that walks with crutches, that lives with a rare disease. And it took me a really long time to get there because, you know what? I shied away from people that weren't like me, that looked like me, because I was scared that what could happen to that, what happens to me could be worse, and I could be them. And I think that happens with a lot of people. And I think that people are scared of it. And I was scared of myself. And it took me a really long time to say, you know what? I'm no longer scared of myself. And I was given this pushy voice and this mindset to say, you know what? I am good enough, and I am not going to be invisible anymore. Even though the world saw me as Lauren, 4'0", walks with crutches, wears heels, I just saw myself as Lauren. I did not see myself as being disabled. And that's what I brought to the table. And when people may ask me about it, I was kind of like, well, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't know what you're talking about. Now I have a different mindset. And ever since I wrote my book, because I'm proud of it, I am proud to use my voice. And so, for example, at Johnson & Johnson, when I first got there, I started looking for people like me, and I didn't see anybody. And I said, okay, I'm at a healthcare company. Why don't I see people like me? Now, we're a very, very large company, so I'm not saying that there are not, because there plenty are, but within where I worked, right? I never saw. But I didn't speak up about it. Then all of a sudden, I just said, I need to, if I want to be seen and I want others to show that people like me can be seen in a workplace, and if you can't be seen at a healthcare company, the largest and most diverse healthcare company, where could you be seen, or how could you really bring your voice to the table? So I said to employee communications, or I said to HR, I want to see more people like me in the workplace. How can I help you establish that? And like one of the first places was, well, we're doing an employee shoot, or we're doing an employee video. Would you be in it? And so there's these little steps that you could take. And then what happens is people then start to see you, and they start to see you not only for your disability, which will always shine through, because it is, when you're physically disabled, it's the first thing that people say. Mm-hmm. But now that they say, you know what? Oh, I know. So if Lauren can be up on the wall, or in a video, or do a presentation like this, I know somebody that is also disabled. Maybe they would like to work there, or maybe, I never thought of them in that way. And I think it just really helps open the eyes. And it wasn't like that. And I think that it's really time for people like me and others to be loud. And for you, Stephanie, as a mom, you want to protect and hold your child, but you also have to give them those wings in order for them to be independent enough and to say, yes, I do have a rare disease, but I'm unstoppable and I could be the next CEO, right? Or I could be the next SVP. I could do whatever I want to do because no matter what, I have a brain to do it. You know, it doesn't matter if you don't have a set of legs or you don't have arms or you don't, whatever it may be, or your legs don't work or your insides don't work perfectly. You really don't need all of that. You need your voice and you need a brain to get there. And those are the two things that most people do have, right?
Mhm.
And if you have those things, speak up for yourself, speak up for others. And it's really time for people to not be afraid of it and to speak up and to say, I work here. I am proud to work here. I want to show off who I am and I want to show off everything about me, because then once you remove that barrier from yourself, others will kind of forget that you have a disability and they'll just see you for Lauren. And for me, it was so important that I share who I am because I was afraid once. And if I was afraid and I can do this now, so can other people. And especially children or teenagers or moms like yourself. If you see people like me grown up and successful and, you know, living in my, you know, in a world that I created for myself, then you know that your child can do that, or you know that your neighbor can do that, or whatever it may be. And, you know, it's this like you said, like you have this happy face on your shirt, this smiling face, and you want to feel happy every day. Well, I feel happy every day. And now I'm proud of who I am. And I want to show the world what it's like, because if they see what it's like, they won't be afraid of it. And even if they are, I'll show them that it's okay. And if anybody should be afraid, it's me. It's not them.
I think that is so beautiful. And I think this talk of being afraid, it triggers another question for me, which is the fear that, to your point about they shouldn't be afraid, if anything, it should be you. And it's an amazing thing that you're not, and you've come past that. When we think about the fears that other people would have, oftentimes, certainly in a professional setting, people are afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing. There are words, you know, and certainly I know the LGBTQ plus community feels this deeply, pronouns and getting it right. And there's a lot of fear around saying the wrong pronoun or saying the wrong adjective or word. How can we, you know, people who are connected to the disabled community help people who aren't feel less afraid, so that we can just all relax a little? And I think that will probably spur more opportunities and more seats at the table. What do you think about that?
I mean, I definitely do. And I call this the 5-minute rule. Give people 5 minutes, talk to them like you would talk to anybody else. Don't be afraid to walk up to them. Actually, when people walk up to me and they may ask me what's wrong, I am so thrilled to tell them about myself and my accomplishments or what I can and can't do, because it makes it real. And then they can connect with me and they know a little bit more and they're not afraid anymore. Because now all of a sudden I'm Lauren with this voice and this brain again, and we're having a real conversation versus you walking past me. And ultimately what I call it is being the producers of my life. You walk past me and you, all of a sudden you may have sadness. You may have created this world that I live in. And once you meet somebody and you give them 5 minutes and you learn just a little bit more about them, you say, oh, wow, you know what? No matter what has happened to her, she's great. She's good, you know, and then you walk and then you won't be afraid. I hate when people don't want to ask me. I have had friends that have never asked me what's wrong and they just go with it. And I will actively now just say, do you want to know why I walk with crutches? Has it ever come to your head? And they're like, yeah, when I first met you, but then it kind of went away. So I never thought to ask. And I will say, did you never think to ask because you were afraid? They will say, they say yes, because I don't know what to say. And I love you, or I, have grown such a fondness, or whatever they say. But what if I said it wrong? And what if you were offended? I'm more offended when you don't say something and less offended when you ask, because I know that you're curious and I know that you want to be educated. And when people want to be educated, they're learning, and then they can educate somebody else. And then it becomes this like water cooler conversation, right? And say, I met this wonderful woman. I met this wonderful man. I met this inspiring child. And then it kind of makes it okay. And if I don't like something, I will tell you, and then you'll know for the next time. But don't just, people assume today. They assume what life is like. They assume that we can't. And when you turn can't on, upside down, and you turn the word no, I'm on all the time. I am doing and creating, and I want to be present there. And once people stop being afraid, it really does go away. Your disability goes away from their lives, because it doesn't define you. It shows who you are initially, but it doesn't define who you are as a human.
I think that's beautiful. And for everyone on the call, oftentimes in these types of conversations, audiences are left with, but what can I do? How can I help? And I think Lauren's given us some really, really practical and easy things that we can do to help move this change forward. Number one, anticipating needs before there needs to be accommodations, and not just thinking about what the building looks like, but actively also looking at recruiting opportunities and reaching out to proactively reaching out to colleges and universities, and finding people who don't have easy access to the opportunities, but that are qualified, and giving them a chance. And also, being vulnerable yourself, and letting yourself sort of say the wrong thing, but own it. It's okay. And it's also okay to say, I don't know the right thing to say. I don't want to offend you. Is it okay if I use this word? And that really disarms the conversation. And I think, Lauren, you said it beautifully. If someone says something you don't like, you're very capable of telling them, and then they'll know for next time. So it's better to say something, to acknowledge it, to ask, to show curiosity in a respectful way, than to not. I could go on and on. I have questions, but I want to encourage everyone in the audience to add questions too to the Q&A.
Just one of the last things I do want to say before we start taking questions is also, there's so many incredible marketers on here. It's not just good enough for us to be hired, but you have to think about including us in the campaigns itself, or think about the language too, of the way that you're presenting your company, or presenting a new project, or presenting a new video. Don't just bucket us, for so many years, especially on TV and in film, they would put either a very short person on, and they would be the representative, or they would put somebody with Down syndrome, and that would be a representative. But they would say, yes, we do include. Well, you're not including every kind. And then you're assuming that everybody looks like this, or everybody has this kind of disease or virus or whatever it may be. And that, it's all about representation. And it's representation of all kinds of people. And so really think about that the next time you're producing a video, or the next time you're putting out a new ad campaign, or the language that you're setting forth in your company's mission too. You can't really be inclusive and diverse if you're not including this community. And, because every single person in their life will feel disabled. You will break an ankle, you won't have use of something. And that use, you will lose that, and you will feel disabled. And then you will understand, even if it's for an hour or 4 weeks, what that is like.
I think that's a great point. It's so important to remember that, you may not have those needs now, but you may in the future, or someone you love may. And so really, making the world ready for that is so important. And thank you for bringing up the point about representation. And if I could just add a finer point, I've heard you speak about this and others, that it's not just putting them up on the screen, but making sure that you're not making them a pity case. Put them up on the screen in the same tone and voice as you would an able-bodied person. It's so important to not reinforce the stigma. These are people that deserve the same amount of respect, and they need to be shown in a strong, powerful, invincible way, just like able-bodied people do. I would love to invite some questions into the Q&A if you guys have any. I also, for those of you who are on the call, we mentioned C Talent. I am not affiliated with them. I can get no kickback, but I'd love to just add the link. I'll put it up here in the chat. They offer, there are many companies that do this, but they offer consultation on creative, on how to respectfully and accurately and effectively represent people with disabilities on screen. So I don't know if there's questions, and also if we don't get to them, we're happy to I'm sure Lauren would be happy to answer them, and through Brand Innovators, we can provide those responses. But while we're waiting, you mentioned this photo, Lauren, at J&J, and I saw this on your Instagram feed. I'd love to know the story behind it. There's a photo of you, and behind you, there is a wall with a life-size print of you. I want to know, what was that? How did that come to be? And yeah, just tell us the backstory.
Well, like I said, I started to become a lot more vocal when I saw when they were doing employee shoots, and I didn't see anybody that looked like me. And so I made it very vocal and just said, if you're doing another employee shoot, please include somebody like me. I said, and if you can't find anybody, I'm up for the task. So it was actually during the pandemic, and J&J was, trying to be ahead of the curve and say, okay, we'll be back to the office soon. We want to see we want to do a welcome back to the office. And so they blew up pictures of people. And so they sent a photographer to employees' homes, and I was one of them. And then, you didn't know if you were going to be chosen. And at that point, you didn't know that your photo was going to be so life-size. It was like a billboard. But yes, I saw it and I was so honored. And it's one of the photos that you'll see if you come to the J&J building in New Jersey, and there's like a walkway of employees, and it's a walkway of representation of who represents the company. So it's really, they did a beautiful, absolutely beautiful job.
That's incredible. Yeah, so you guys should follow Lauren on Instagram and you can check it out. I want to wrap this session up. Not surprisingly, we went a bit over. Thank you for everything that you've shared, and really for joining today. It doesn't seem like it's the most convenient time for you to be doing a conversation.
Okay, I have to go get my eyes checked next. I had a hearing test this morning. Then I had an ENT, and then now I have to go to ophthalmology and then a pain study.
Well, wish you the best of luck. I hope it all goes smoothly. Thank you so much for showing up every day, and certainly today. I've learned so much from you, and thank you all for joining. And if you do have questions for Lauren, you can route them to the Brand Innovators team, and they will get in touch with Lauren.
And Stephanie, please reach out if you have any questions about your daughter, or just need to chat to myself, to my parents, on how they dealt with the kids with rare diseases. That's why I'm here today. So I'm here because I have a rare disease, and I'm at the National Institute of Health because they have a natural history study.
That's incredible. I wish you the best of luck. It was so nice to meet you. And thank you again, everyone, for joining. Jessie, I will turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Lauren. Thank you so much, Stephanie. You guys are so incredible. And Lauren, thank you so much for your honesty and candidness. You're an absolute rock star, and just wishing you the best. Really appreciate her being here with us today. And I really want to thank Stephanie as well for being here with us. Hi, everyone. I am taking over for David for this really special day we have on this live cast. My name is Jessie Shapiro. I'm the content and community lead out here in LA for the Southwest. Up next, I'm thrilled to introduce Zena Koda, the Senior Director and Digital Brand Management for North Face, and her moderator, Sylvia Banderas-Coffinet, the General Manager of Multicultural Brand Partnerships and Marketing for Group 9 Media. Welcome. We'd really love to welcome you both and really excited for this conversation.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Jessie. I'm so excited today. I'm going to go ahead and start us off and just kick it off. Thank you for joining everyone for the Brand Innovators Fireside Chat on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I'm Sylvia Banderas-Coffinet, General Manager of Multicultural Brand Partnerships Marketing at Group 9. My pronouns are she and hers. And I have the great pleasure of moderating today, and our featured speaker is Zena. Zena, can we kick off by having you introduce yourself? Give us your preferred pronouns, who you are, what you do, and tell us a fun fact about yourself.
Oh, totally. Hi, everybody. Thrilled to be joining today to talk about this really important subject and how it kind of impacts different parts of diversity and inclusion. So thank you for having me. I am Zena Kuda. I oversee all of our brand digital at the North Face. My pronouns are she and her. My fun fact is that in my past life, I was actually a heavy metal DJ on Sirius XM. Still do a little bit of that freelance TV hosting work. Remember when TV hosting work was actually a full-time job at a certain point? MTV, Fuse, shout out those days, but pivoted obviously my career a bit into the space, and just super passionate about connecting the dots with diversity, inclusion. And if anything we learned over the last, few years, my God, I feel like we're in a vortex of time at this point. It really hits a lot of different points that I think you've seen in some of the speakers prior to us. And I'm excited to jump into this. But Sylvia, tell me about one of your facts, your funny facts.
Oh, my fun fact. I studied spiders in Brazil for I thought I was actually going to become an anthropologist, and I'm obsessed with arachnids. Who knew? Anyway. Terrifying. It's one of those things people are like, what? But I have to say it was a marvelous time, and spiders have a lot to teach us. They're social creatures. They help each other out. They let other spiders live on their web as long as they clean up after themselves, which really speaks to the big sister in me. So yeah, but very cool. Thank you for sharing that, Zena. I would definitely never have guessed that. I'd like to ground our conversation today and really bring us down to our most authentic selves. So I'd like to ask you to please tell us what DE&I means to you. And if you wouldn't mind sharing your personal why. This is such hard work. So what keeps you focused, grounded, and resilient?
God, it's such a loaded one to start. I think we discussed this in kind of our prep, but D&I to me is really like creating and being the community that you want to see, especially in your daily work. I think a lot of, the last 2 years, again, has been a cataclysmic, kind of collision of all of these different things that you had never considered, at least in the workplace before, right? And when you pull back and look at, all of the different expectations that were put on employers, on employees, on, even consumers, thinking about what you assess as a valid, a response from a brand. There were so many things that we were challenged with that we had never had to think of for a very long time. So if we're talking about DEI in the workforce, right, it's really being able to take those key considerations. I mean, the last speaker, just even hearing some of the things that the two of them were talking about, you never know what somebody's going through. You never know the battles that they went through. You don't know their history. You don't know their database and their box of knowledge, right? And I think that it's really important as you're considering things, when you're thinking from a brand perspective, through campaigns and just how perception could come off to consumers, how you're living by your values within that work. It really appears not only at the highest levels of the business and making sure that those things are, evangelized at the top levels, but it's literally every day, right? And going through these actions and considering them every day. So I believe that DEI is really a learning process for everybody involved, whether you're an expert or a novice, right? And this is a new area that you're beginning to feel comfortably uncomfortable with, right? These are things that you just have to really assess every day and really insert into your work. And on my personal side, what's really been driving me is I'm very civically and politically engaged, but above and beyond that, I started a nonprofit called Asian American Collective with two other women who were also in the music industry. Prior to coming to the North Face, I was in the music industry for pretty much my entire career on the media side. And we looked around for years and didn't see other Asian American women, whether it was in rock music or hip hop. So it was a very diverse pool on both sides, but no Asians. and seeing kind of that lack of representation within our community and an area that we love, finding each other was kind of kismet, right? We came together and we created this community, and being able to build and watch and mentor younger Asian Americans that want to be in kind of more fun, creative concentrations, not be a doctor, nurse, or a lawyer. Just traditionally, when you come from an immigrant background, get to the money. The parents are like, let's get right to the money, right? Like, let's not make my move in vain.
Mhm.
So as you know, too, because I know that you have a similar background in that way, it was just very important for me to nurture that love. It's just so important for people to explore what being themselves actually means for them personally, and being able to bring that to the Asian American community, especially during the time where, Stop Asian Hate and this whole racial awakening that we had never stepped into as a collective group, especially not Asian Americans, because it was like, you be quiet and you keep going and you just assimilate as much as possible. That experience has been probably one of the most fulfilling parts of my life personally in the last few years, and giving back and being able to be motivated by seeing people get jobs, be successful within our group, and continuing to grow and mentor and be the representation that I never had growing up. So it's hyper personal to me. What about you, Sylvia?
Oh, that's really rich. For me too, it's very personal. My personal why comes from growing up undocumented. I came to this country when I was 6 years old, undocumented, and I grew up in LA during Pete Wilson. And so I learned very quickly that there were sets and hierarchies of people, and there were people who were meant to be invisible, even if they were right before you, even for their own safety. And I fell into that category. And growing up, seeing and understanding my privilege, because I am white passing, and more so than a lot of the undocumented community could look like. And I think that I experienced this duality of both privilege and marginalization, and it marked me so deeply. So for me, this work is hyper personal. And it's what keeps me grounded, because it is difficult work, and it's day in and day out. And, it's evolving, and it's growing, and it's living, and it's breathing, because it's based on our society and its needs. And with that, my next question to you, and what I'd love for us to explore, is, do you believe that DE&I is a form of social justice?
Oh, absolutely. I think when, obviously we were all sitting in the house for a good 2 years. We're still half in the house as I'm broadcasting live from my house. But, when times were super intense, one thing that I started to consider as somebody who had been born in the digital space, right, and really crafted my career in a time where it was a very key turning point for digital, right? Where people started to use these social outlets for a multitude of reasons, more than just direct communication. We've all seen this kind of spur and kind of grow into this huge, impactful platform that you would have never considered before. And I think, you hear minor criticisms that people have of people speaking out, and what does a post mean? And is that really enough social justice work? Are you doing it in real life? And, I would catch myself on a very personal level, feeling some kind of way, yeah, they're right. But then I started to actually realize during this time, and as we started to incubate in the house and start to build our narratives and really read, consider, chat, dialogue more about these things, that it is actually social justice. And going, actually evangelizing your thoughts to the world, for a lot of people, that's a huge step. And that's a huge step forward to be able to actually do do dynamic personal work, right? To think through what is it, most of the times people are not putting those things on social media. There's two factions of social media folk, right? Those who are ready to like just be there immediately, and those who are like, I'll post once every 4 months and you may never hear from me for another 6, right? But that ability to kind of dialogue and actually have meaningful conversations, good, bad, and ugly, I think is actually something that I've come to terms with as being a social device to help people engage in conversation and learn more. Now, we've seen it go completely left. The election in the last like four years on that end has been kind of abusive in some odd ways, but I do think that it also like unlocked an ability for people to have more meaningful conversations than just like, passive social conversations. And it allowed people to like at least dip into an activism who wouldn't have done it before. So that's kind of a skirt around the question in some ways, but also I do think that DEI work, whether it's internal or external, kind of encompasses the same principles, right? Because you're taking not only what you stand by, whether it's a company or a person, no matter who you are, and evangelizing it to the world, right? Holding yourself accountable through that work, but also the inside can't be rotten. The inside has to actually be structured in the same way. And that is definitely a shade of social justice, right? Because you are doing the work that you want to see in the holistic part of society. Like when you're looking at the larger, quotient, you're seeing that work come to life in a smaller way, but that's life, right? That's what we're doing from a day-to-day basis. So I would say it definitely is. It's important work to actually help push the narrative, push laws, change overarching thoughts. And it's been cool to actually see some of that come to light and to explore other areas that we may not have considered in the past. What about you?
You said that so beautifully. And I agree with all of your points. I think it really does raise the question, like what role do
Sorry.
It's okay. Hi there, pup.
The dog sees my husband and she's like that.
Oh, my dogs do the same thing. All good.
Welcome to work from home.
I know, it's like living at work or working at home, right? Both. I was just about to say that, yes, agree on all fronts. And it really does raise the question of the role that corporations play, the corporate responsibility. And we think about what that means nowadays and how consumers are perceiving the role that corporations are playing. And like you mentioned, it's not only an individual purpose, but your values, and that value as a consumer is a value you buy into. And I think consumers more than ever are so aware of what their dollars do and what they support and what they stand for and what they represent. So I hear even the terminology has changed from I buy this product to I support this brand, or I prefer this brand because this brand is sustainable. There is a sense now where these worlds are colliding in the most beautiful way, and corporate responsibility is taking on a whole nother level. And with that, both falling into this category of how DE&I is a social justice movement in many ways. With that, I want to ask you what your thoughts are. Often I hear the question about how is multicultural marketing similar or different than DE&I, or are they two sides of the same coin? How do you express that? And what does that mean to you when you think of DE&I, the philosophy and the practice, and then multicultural marketing and how the two are related?
Oh, this was such a great question when you get it from people. And I've been thinking about it more and more. I think they are two sides of the same coin, but they have to work together, right? Because DE&I really expands past just racial and cultural background, right? There are so many different pieces of enablement that are kind of like ancillary arms to what you need for consideration for anything, right? And I think that one of the things that I had brought up too is like for instance, Women's History Month or International Women's Day, the scope of who identifies as women has completely changed, right? Obviously you have born women, and then you have people who consider themselves women now. And I think those are some of the things that maybe, 2 or 3 years ago, or even maybe a little deeper, like 5 years ago, would not have been even been on the table for consideration for any mainstream company to really have to evaluate. But I think that those are the nuances that you actually need to think through now. And when you think of like that level of inclusion, that level of diversity in what your slate and your marketing is going to include, it's table stakes at this point, right? Like we need to really be cognizant of those things. And I do think that almost every company has, a responsibility to be thinking through these things and admitting or just like acknowledging when there's an ignorance to it, or, trying to do better. I don't think anybody's going to be perfect, right? And because this is one of the few times, at least in my lifetime, that I feel we're actually learning a revolution together. Mm-hmm. There's a shade of kindness, right? You need to think through and a little bit of consideration to people's learning curve here, because it definitely is not completely outlined. And I think when you talk about multicultural marketing, I had worked with, when I was working at an agency, I worked with a lot of film clients at the time, and a lot of the film clients have very clear specific marketing down to Black marketing, Asian marketing, Hispanic marketing, LGBTQ marketing. Everything is very specifically boxed because there's also a lot of analysis of who their consumer is and who's digesting content and targeting in a way that we all know from the marketing world, being involved in that, it helps us to hyper target to and understand those audiences. And I think modern multicultural marketing, right, kind of like pins off the heels of that, where you kind of have to be cognizant of who your consumer is in order for you to market the correct way. And if I'm being real, you can't do all things at once, right? Like you have to, every company has the ability to do things, but it has to be very aligned with their values and who they are. And I think when you think about those different pieces, they do come together now. And they do connect in a way that needs to be cognizant of the other. And again, I think that the most meaningful campaigns and the most meaningful marketing and the most meaningful outreach to consumers is when it's really values driven and it feels connected with the ethos of the brand, and it feels connected with what the brand is doing when they're putting their money where their mouth is, when they're making the actions, and also doing them internally. Then all of these things come together and actually feel meaningful versus it just being a face.
Yes, it must be interdependent, all of it. And that's so beautifully said. And with that, I think one of the most interesting things that I've been thinking a lot about and would love your take on this is cancel culture. There's a part of me that cringes. And then there's another part of me that's like, well, it's accountability. I think it's a very complicated subject, one that, this whole session could be about that. But I'd love your point of view and just thinking, together through what is cancel culture? What is the impact of cancel culture? The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Ooh,
I know it's
I queued up a Harvey Weinstein documentary on Hulu that I was actually going to rewatch because it's been a while since I've watched it. Thinking about cancel culture and just how crazy it's gotten, right, over the last years. I think there's a good and a bad to cancel culture. I think there were a lot of people who were oppressed or abused for a very long time who were not able to really collectively identify with some of those abuses and some of the things that had happened. And as a woman, when I look at the Me Too movement, like, man, I would have never in my life thought that I would see women rising to the occasion and being vocal and being out there with the experiences that they had. So I think there's a good part of it where it doesn't allow people to maintain rotten for long, right? It doesn't allow people to get away with as much as they might have gotten, away with when the internet didn't exist, for instance. There's a lot more receipts these days. And I think that that's something that people collectively need to be aware of as they go into their actions. And that's also something that's kind of comforting, right? That other people are willing to support and engage when it's time, if something's egregiously wrong, right? On the other side of it, I think that cancel culture can be super wild, right? Because people were allowed to make mistakes back in the day, right? And there were many mistakes made, right? Think about if you were a brand and you put out a TV ad during the Super Bowl in maybe the 80s or 90s, right? You invested so much financially into that. If it was a miss, it was a miss and you paid for it, right? And these days, it's really interesting. Like the misses can either be way smaller of a margin or way bigger, depending on how quickly it moves through the internet, right? Where versus back in the day, you'd see it in this one little granular space, and then you're able to move on and kind of move forward. It took a lot more, I think, to really spark people off. So I think cancel culture is really dangerous too, because it doesn't promote education. And it kind of perpetuates some of the negativity, especially online and some of the platforms that like help to perpetuate those things. It kind of perpetuates just this negativity that education is meant to negate, right? Because it's meant to be a dialogue where people are openly able to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. And I fear that cancel culture will also like inflame people on the other sides too. We've seen it happen. We've seen it happen. You think about a year ago with the insurgency and the Capitol and everything that was going on there, it just completely, I was watching another documentary on HBO about that day. And it really reminded me that the intention was real there. The intention was there, but it was really sparked from what is the ugly part, I think, of cancel culture. That like people feel alienated by cancel culture, and we do live in a world where people have different thoughts, right? Whether you agree or not with them, you have to acknowledge that those thoughts are there. So I'm very 50-50 on cancel culture. And I think that it will hopefully, as the world is deflated a little bit, or the fans have come to the flames a bit, hopefully we won't have as much of like a hardline cancel, because I think the education, again, is a really big piece. But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on cancel culture, especially, working in the media group.
I like the accountability aspect of it. I just think that it's been misconstrued. Like, I believe that when you have a situation with like a Harvey Weinstein, where there's so much power against what potentially, somebody's life could be destroyed by even the possibility of speaking up. I understand at that level why cancel culture could be useful. But I think when you bring it down to everyday, or, a lot of these social conversations that are happening, what's hard about cancel culture for me is that it shuts down conversation. It just puts people into a box, and it's very black and white, and there's no such thing. I think that there are a couple of instances where it is very black and white. There are a few, but for the most part, I believe, like you said, education, communication, humility, these are the basics of DE&I. You can't have even a conversation around what DE&I is if you're not willing to get humble and uncomfortable and listen to the other side. Totally. So cancel culture is sort of the antithesis of that. And so I struggle with that. But I do see how it's useful. And I do see how in some instances, very, very, aggressive instances, it can be the right thing, and it can be a wonderful tool in the toolbox. But I would say it's sort of like a nuclear button. And you only want to leverage it if you absolutely have to, because I think it's unhealthy in many ways and very alienating. And the more we alienate, the less we come together, and the less we understand each other, and the less we build humility, and the less we build empathy. And all of these things are, the web of what forms DE&I in its basic principles. And so yeah, that's my take. But
I agree. I couldn't agree more. I think that the nuclear button is a great great analogy. There's so much danger to it, and frankly, no one remains canceled that long, right? That's the other ironic part of cancel culture, that it's immediate, like hot button reaction. But I mean, eventually, and we've seen this in the past, right? As long as media has existed and amplified messages, people have been canceled and then come back 20 years later, and you're like, they're on top of the world 20 years later, because you're dealing with a new generation who may not know them. So it does feel more damaging and more reactive than it needs to be at a certain point. And again, I do believe that like the best way to really sit down and understand. And I do think, like, for instance, like, Dave Chappelle and some of these like bigger artists that say maybe off the cuff things that maybe they didn't mean, it was part of a joke or their art or whatever the case. There is a responsibility too, though, on the evangelizing behalf, right? To understand the implications in this day and age of what you say and what you do. And sometimes you got to learn, right? Like sometimes you got to learn that it's not necessarily like that anymore. And I do think that it's a learning curve again for many people. And the best way to do and understand is to sit down and break bread, like a lot of people struggled. I think it was very interesting to see during the height of the BLM movement over the last God, it was over like a year ago now. It's crazy. Again, time is flying. Just to see how many people were like, I don't understand. I never knew this. Like a lot of my white friends and other people who had not necessarily like had to be confronted with a lot of these things. And my number one ask was always like, when's the last time you brought a Black friend to dinner and sat down with them or brought them to your house and talked to them? And there is this whole notion of breaking bread. And I've always grew up in a diverse community with many different people, right? So that to me had never felt foreign. But when you really think about it and you put it on the table, breaking bread together and understanding each other in your private space and having intimate conversations is actually how those changes happen, right? Instead of like, let's cancel this person and that, like, let's talk about these things in a real way, like heart to heart, with a glass of wine, of course.
That always helps.
Yes.
I definitely agree. And I do think that, and this kind of goes into the last question because we're almost at time. And honestly, Zena, I could talk to you forever. This is so much fun. When we think about a lot of times DE&I, something that I have found, and I'd love your take, is that often the philosophy and the practice don't always come from a place of common sense. Oftentimes, you do have to understand the philosophy in order to be able to practice it correctly. And one of the things that I have found really important as you're trying to build safe spaces and inclusive spaces is this idea of being very blunt about this isn't like something you have to go out of your way to learn it. You have to go out of your way to embrace a philosophy because it's not common sense. For example, in order to do DE&I properly, you would have to seriously embrace conflict, mine for conflict, look for conflict. We're taught for generations in professional settings to avoid conflict or that conflict is bad. So in that vein, can you share 3 important tips that you'd like to give that maybe are not so common sense that help move your organization forward, the people around you forward, that we can put into, eat those into action?
Oh, totally. I agree. Like sometimes the ideas are great, but in execution, it's definitely tough. I think I kind of alluded to one, and this is something actually I've grown to be very empathetic and understand from like a larger organizational point of view. I think a lot of times, again, people really want a magic button and everything's different and the company works completely differently and they're going to be cognizant of everything, right? And again, a little bit of this fast food culture that we live in, right, makes it feel like it's easy, but actually like structural change, as we can see by the government, is glacial, right? Like it takes a lot of buy-in. It takes years to really get things to the space. And even then, again, it will be different in 10 years culturally, right? So one thing I've really tried to step into and evangelize is that it is our jobs every day to, again, be the kind of change we want to see and step into our power and utilize our voice, right? If there's something you see that's not hitting the mark with you or rubbing you the wrong way because you feel that it could be potentially offensive to somebody, pipe up, because it is your power. I just think that it's so important to take those opportunities because so many people don't want to say anything out of fear, but your voice is massively important. And if we're going to, especially me as a minority, right? And, all of us other folks who are minorities who are also in positions of influence, if we're going to make a change, we have to do it by speaking and by sharing our experiences and explaining why, right? So stepping into that power and utilizing that power every day to be influential on the choices that are made is a number one tip for me. Sometimes you expect everything, again, just to change overnight, but it actually happens in those small steps every single day. It's like losing weight, right? It's cutting out those few calories every day. And then eventually you're like, wow, I'm skinny. Great. Also, another thing I would say is when you're trying to assess those kind of plans that you're making, or, you know, to your point, not making it like theoretically great, but actually actionably great. It's really thinking about how it directly impacts the community. And is there a give back component to the community? Is there a systemic way that you're helping to support that community? And what are those inroads and ways that your public facing actions can actually be helping to change the lives of other people on the back end? I think that that's something a lot of companies struggle with, because again, there is no snap of the fingers. It's very structurally reliant, right? You have to make sure that structure is there. And one thing I could say about the North Face, we have this incredible Explore Fund that's been around for a very long time. And we have a council that we did this year that was super cool, and watching that come to life and kind of like talk about the impacts that it could have in the community. We'll have some cool stuff coming up, so keep an eye on some of the findings that we got. But like seeing that and how those actions impact the community, that's just, to me, when I think about like a way that things have been put together, right? That's the real way, right? It's not a statement online. That is changing the outdoor community from the inside out. And I just love it. And I'm so excited by that work because it really is making that impact. And third thing, lead with kindness and empathy. I would say, like, people are, again, struggling. You don't know their backgrounds. You don't know how hard it could be. And by one conversation and kind of just figuring out how you have more of a meaningful dialogue with your consumers and with other people, I do think that it will help not only help to change the face of what you're doing, but also like impact your future plans based off of that.
Wow. That is just, I mean, so many wonderful tokens of just advice and nuggets to pick up and put into action. I couldn't agree with you more. I think one of the best things about working at Group 9 is that we really do lead with purpose, and we put our ethos into action in everything that we do. And that is a proof point for whether or not your DE&I strategy is working. I think we went over a little bit, but it was hard not to with such
you're a great moderator, Sylvia. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You have so much wisdom to share, Zena. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much for listening too.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. Really appreciate it. Have a good one. Huge thank you to Zena and Sylvia for that awesome conversation. Really interesting. I enjoyed it so much. Up next, we're going to keep this party going. I am so happy to introduce Leanne Shear, the Director of Operations and Culture at City Row, and moderating her conversation, we have Myron King, the Chief Integration Officer of North America for VMLY&R. Hello, welcome.
Hello. I am just going to put my background on because I really love this beautiful blue, so you all don't have to see my apartment. Let's see here. All right. Hi, Myron. Nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. Good afternoon.
Hello. All right, here we are.
Excellent. Well, the gang is all here. Let's jump right into it with the season's greetings to everyone that's able to join us today. I'm glad to share my time, energy, and heart with Brand Innovators as they are celebrating their 10th anniversary of accelerating digital transformation and transforming marketing and media both. My name is Myron King, Chief Integration Officer here at VMLY&R, and this is the fourth of the fireside chats today, and it's been a really impressive lineup. Hopefully you've been able to enjoy some of those other conversations. But I'm fortunate to be speaking with speaker, author, entrepreneur, and DEI champion, Leanne Shear. She's the Director of Operations and Culture at City Row, a company transforming the exercise landscape in New York City and beyond. And we had a previous conversation just to get aligned for today's talk. And I think we became fast friends because of our alignment on so many of these topics and issues. I think you're a superhero, Leanne, and all superheroes have an origin story. So why don't we start by you sharing a bit of yours?
I love that. Thank you. And I feel exactly the same way about you because I want to hear your story too. Yeah, and I am thrilled to be here. Thank you all so much. I've listened to the previous fireside chats, and I am going to leave here today incredibly inspired. It's the things we're talking about. I'm probably going to reference some of the previous chats in my chat because I just couldn't stop taking notes. So brava to a job well done to everyone before us. Yeah, as Myron said, I've had a really interesting career. Originally from Buffalo, New York, and I always have to say that quick go Bills in there for our team this year. And I moved to New York City right after graduating college, where I went in Philly, and almost right away became a professional writer. And my career has evolved from there. I spent a lot of time writing, published a couple of books, started freelancing for magazines and newspapers. And then right when I was getting my master's degree in essentially women's studies and cultural politics to be able to write more knowledgeably and on bigger topics like female empowerment, I had the opportunity to open my business, which was called Uplift. And Uplift was a women-only fitness studio in female society. We did all sorts of things to empower women. Fitness, I'm not a fitness guru. Fitness was a means to an end to empowerment. Very quickly, I saw that when women became strong, literally physically strong, it translated into other areas of their life. So we evolved and grew the company. It was a really wonderful experience. To move on, I decided to close down Uplift at the end of 2019. And merely because it had run its course, it was time, and we had a brick and mortar location, and anyone that's ever owned a brick and mortar location knows that sometimes they run their courses. And I started in early 2020, consulting for a variety of companies, and then City Row, one of them, brought me on board as director of culture and operations. And I think where Myron and I first connected is on the idea of how important this work is in a cultural sense of every organization. So that's where I am today, also doing all sorts of things around female empowerment and writing my next book on female empowerment.
Exciting. That's an impressive story. I spent some time in upstate New York as well. So I was in Rochester, so I have a little bit of familiarity with Buffalo. And their affinity for wings, things like that.
Lucky you.
Yeah, indeed. My origin story is slightly different, but I'm from Kansas City, and I probably swore at one point never to return to Kansas City, and but here I am and have been here for maybe 20 plus years since returning, and haven't regretted it. Raised a family here. And found VML-Y&R in 2006. So I joined them after 6 years as a consultant, traveling all across the United States, doing state and local government IT consulting. And this was right around the time of Y2K. So digital wasn't really a term of art at that time, but what I was doing was literally user experience and training and implementation for concepts that were really about creating more access to systems for people that are really literally saving lives in the real world. So that's how I got my entree into this work that we do at the intersection of marketing and technology. But it was always from a human-centered perspective, from an experience perspective. And it has nothing to do with necessarily what I studied in college. I have bachelor's degrees in communications and political science. I thought I was going to be an attorney or something like that. And then went to grad school for public policy analysis. So I'm better with large data sets and statistical models than maybe some of this creative stuff that I've learned to be better at. So at VML-Y&R, I'm the Chief Integration Officer. It's a role that's very business facing, but it's also very internal facing, and it's about helping our organization embrace some of the cultural transformation that it needs to embrace in order to be the most inclusive, diverse, and creative agency in the world. In that work, I get to engage with people of all sorts and types, and ultimately because of my position of authority and having been there for 15 years, there's some leadership obligations to come along with it. And I think my ultimate leadership obligation is to be the best leader, mentor, boss, partner, friend, teammate I can be, particularly to people that don't necessarily look like me. Now, I want to be the best one for people that do, because there's such a small number of us in the roles and in the marketplace. So when we talk about empowerment, when we talk about female empowerment, when we talk about all of these issues that are related to helping people be their best selves and not have the obstacles that are in their way structurally or institutionally or psychologically, I'm here for that and have been here for that for years. So I'm glad that we're aligned on that point. And hopefully this is a fantastic conversation and folks are able to take away a few pointers, if you will, tips, tricks, hacks, things like that.
I think you and I were very excited about making sure that we had tactics and takeaways for everyone. So I'm excited to talk about those later too.
Excellent. Then let's start with we've heard something about using your voice. I think Zena and Sylvia both talked about that in the close of their fireside chat. And I think you could put the word empowered in front of that. Having a voice and then using that voice and then having that voice heard. It's a multi-layered challenge, but you've got some real impact stories around finding that voice. Maybe you share some of yours and how you found yours and how you teach others and help others find theirs.
Sure. Yeah. So when I was at Uplift, just backing up a step, I started developing a point of view around female empowerment. And just a note that, as all of the speakers today have proven and will continue to prove, obviously marginalized voices and marginalization has many faces, but so does empowerment. So I speak typically about female empowerment because that's been my experience in my wheelhouse, but empowerment broadly can be translated across a variety of verticals when it comes to marginalization. So just for simplification, I'll probably say female empowerment a fair amount, but we can definitely expand upon that. But at Uplift and beyond, I developed 9 pillars of female empowerment, and where I think empowerment starts, my thesis is actually quite simple. It starts with an individual getting empowered. And there are a lot of different ways to do that, but that starts with insight, adopting a growth mindset. And I think that's really important because a growth mindset is uncomfortable. So it's really digging into the discomfort of change and evolution and learning and growing. And ultimately, when more and more people start to get empowered, we come together in communities of empowered people, we gain strength in numbers. And my end goal is total power. And I don't mean total power where women take over the world, but at least we have parity. So, equality at the end of the day, where women are on par with men and everyone is essentially equal in the society. So, I know smashing the patriarchy is a lofty goal, but that's my starting point. And thanks for bringing up voice, Myron, because that's another one of my pillars. And I think what's really interesting about that is, and this will certainly be the seed to our conversation about how to help people gain an empowered voice and be empowered. But where, for me, and I think a lot of people, it starts or should start, is listening. And listening is so important because it's a very active thing. So that might be counterintuitive, but I think of listening, somebody can just sit there and listen and not hear anything, but there's such a thing. There's even a term, active listening. I'm sure we've all heard of that, where you actually pay attention. And what's really interesting about listening is it's actually, in my mind, an interaction. So there's an exchange of energy. When I listen carefully to someone and really hear what they're saying, I feel good and empowered. So it's a two-way street in a really, really powerful way to empowerment and ultimately power.
I love that. I think there's such a, I've said it a few times that the only gift COVID gave us is the gift of connection. And really you can't connect authentically if you're not willing to listen, if you're not willing to step away from the things you think and just kind of see that moment of, I get it, I understand, and just pause. It's not about getting it sometimes. It's not about understanding so much as it is about receiving, and And there's like two mindsets. There's a fast thinking mode and a slow thinking mode. And we spend 98% of our time in fast thinking, which is like, what am I going to do next? How am I going to react? How am I going to respond? Versus just embrace, receive, ponder, reflect, and then connect. And I feel like we've had a bit more forced time to emphasize that point of connection. So I've always valued the listening and the active listening, but I think there's something even more, another layer to it of, kind of pause what you think have some epistemic humility, if you will, and don't assume that what you know is the only thing there is to know or the only way there is to know it. I think that'll help a lot of leaders better listen to people that aren't like them to understand what help looks like, what empowerment looks like, what sharing and co-authorship and collaboration look like. So great point.
Yeah, I love that too. I think it's really important to underline that I don't know, was it Socrates? Way back in the day said, true wisdom is admitting you know nothing, or maybe he just said, I know nothing. But I think that's really powerful. And I love too what you just said about, we're all so eager to jump in and not necessarily even provide the answer, but provide our opinion or thoughts on things. And because we're all really smart, engaged people, I get it. But I just think that there's something so important about sitting back. And it's also a point of vulnerability to admit that you don't know anything. Nobody wants to admit that. But it's okay to admit that. It's okay to be that vulnerable and to say, I like to qualify by saying, I don't know that yet. So I think that's a nice way to bridge the gap between total ignorance, because that's not always the right route either, and an overbearing sense of, I know everything. It's, I don't know yet, but I'm listening and learning.
So I want to ask a question about vulnerability. And when we think about the perception of leadership, you successfully ran your own company for a number of years and are now leading another organization and guiding the way for them in terms of how they're going to leverage culture towards growth. How easy or difficult has it been for you to be vulnerable as a female leader when the perception of vulnerability in a woman can be perceived as weakness?
That is a fantastic question. And I could talk for hours on this. I think the biggest challenge has been learning the line between being vulnerable and oversharing, for example. So there's a gamut there, but vulnerability is something beautiful and powerful and important, and everyone should learn to be vulnerable, but there's a line. And I mean, I could say a million, I'm sure we've all seen it a million times in the workplace, in our personal lives, on social media, etc. So where I think the distinction is vulnerability, when it's the positive kind, for lack of a better term, is where you share something and there's a lesson or an end goal, or you learned something, or both people can learn something. Oversharing is that feeling where someone is just sobbing in their social media camera for all the world to see. No offense if anyone has done that, but I just think that's a pretty big difference. And I think it's very difficult for women. The founder of City Rose, this incredible woman, she, it's a tech company, really, fitness, but it's a digital app and at-home rower. And the founder is raising money right now. And she's struggling with that struggling with it. It's a challenge for her. She's not struggling with it. She's doing beautifully, but it's being a woman and towing that line, because there's a backlash effect too. Women really do have to toe the line, because if you are too feminine, you're perceived, or, quote unquote, too feminine, you're perceived as weak. If you're too, quote unquote, masculine and aggressive, you're perceived as too aggressive. So in a lot of ways we can't win. So it's situation by situation, determining that line and being, again, sort of a listening and awareness factor to it, because it's case by case, I think, too.
Yeah, I'm studying that and observing it and trying to refine, my own approach to leadership to fit differing contexts and different situations. We can't always be the same leader all the time. And I won't say that anything is mutually exclusive, but you can't be two things at once in some cases. So this is an interesting point of view, and finding that line. I think that was one to jot down for the listeners. There is something about that end goal, sharing the lessons and learning together, and that collaborative journey is really important for leaders. If I can trust that you'll be with me as I grow, as I learn, as I ascend, then I don't have as hard a time sharing that with you. I look forward to having people who say, they're standing behind a podium accepting an award and saying in their thank yous, maybe I'm one of the names. I'm good with that as a baseline for how I might be recognized in someone else's path. The backlash is a good one too, Leanne, but no, you were going to say, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I just love your, again, we're very simpatico here. When you talk about leadership, and especially organizationally and corporations at work, there's also a point about, and this pertains to vulnerability as well, leading and managing up and managing down. And you're right, there are different ways to do that. So, I'm sort of a people person. I have a lot of mentees, a lot of people under me that I manage. And, there's sometimes even a temptation to be a little bit more open with that group of people, or there's a million different nuances here, but I just think it's a distinction and an interesting point about leadership and managing people, that you have to look at it up and down. And I think there's no perfect way to do it, but it's important to be aware of those nuances. So just wanted to underscore your point there. I love that.
I appreciate it. I'm thinking that one of the things that I picked up on since COVID is there's leaders that will say, here's what I would do, right? And they give you advice, they give you a suggestion. And there's also a leadership mode of, I hear you, here's what I'll do, right? And I think that sometimes, depending on the personality type you may lean one way than the other. And if you lean towards the what I would do, it may not seem quite as empathetic as here's what I'll do. But that doesn't necessarily create the same space for someone to solve the issue themselves, or to have that challenge and to have that badge or that feather to say, I overcame this, I just got some advice. Have you felt that same sort of push-pull tension between those two poles?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I definitely, as I've grown, I've tried to veer more toward here's what I'll do to help, ostensibly, or here's what I'll do to support you. I'm very opinionated, and I'm a gut instinct kind of person. So it's like, I tend to say, here's what I would do. And again, you're right that there is, I totally agree, there's a context for that, a place and time. But I think empowerment is again, an interactive process in the workplace in particular. So I think, bolstering people the best we can is the thing that we should do, as much as possible. And I think that there's a lot of different ways. You and I have talked a little bit about allyship too. And I read a really interesting article about allyship, and I'll send this out to brand innovators. I really think it's worth the read, or I'll throw it in the chat here in a second. But the title is "Don't Be an Ally, Be an Accomplice." And I love that, because think about the word accomplice. There's almost a negative connotation to it, but it means you're part of something. You might have something to lose even, it's uncomfortable and it's a little bit risky, but it implies action. Like you are right there in the action. And I kind of love that. I think it's a great way to think about not only supporting people in the workplace, but allyship in general. So I didn't mean to jump ahead there, but it feels like a really nice parallel path to everything that we're talking about the workplace and empowerment.
No, I think it's a good bridge when we talk about allyship and really accomplice. I think part of the root is accomplishment, right? It's together, what we can do as a team. So there's definitely, you're right, it has a negative connotation, but really it's about success ultimately. So on that point, and you've been successful clearly, and what were some of none of us got to this point by ourselves. We can look back and say there was one or two or three things that really helped me in my journey, and maybe they came from someone who didn't look like you, right? Can you cite one or two things that you received from others on your path so that others might understand how to empower?
Sure. Yeah. The first one is seemingly small, but actually has impacted my life in professionally in particular, but really across the board. A mentor, an older woman, white woman, she did look like me, but was very, very successful. And it was when I was a little earlier in my career and not as secure, quite frankly. I questioned everything. I didn't trust myself in business yet. She said, here's where we're going to start. Edit every single one of your emails and every single conversation and take out the words, thank you, and I'm sorry, and start bragging a little bit about yourself. And if you can't bring yourself to brag and tout your accomplishments, when someone like Myron, you just said, I'm very successful, I nodded my head and I said, yes. So say thank you. That's it. You don't think about how many times, and this is in particular, women do this. They receive, someone says either you look great or that was a great presentation or, a myriad of things. And they say, oh, well, no, that was Susie. She did all the work. I just stood up there. So no more of that. And it's amazing. Thank you. Even answering emails, I don't say thank you anymore. I say cheers, or I'll reframe the paragraph to take out those words. So seemingly small, but that has definitely empowered me. And I see the effects of that because of how I feel. I feel so much more confident. And sure, there are a million reasons for that. Growth and experience are part of it, but that has really helped. So I'd advise every woman out there to start looking at her emails and her conversations and change a few words there.
A good one. Can I just want to put a couple of fine points on that for the note takers, because I take a lot of notes whenever I'm in a conversation. And one is, go ahead and take your bow, right?
Love it.
Small things, big things, and in between, and accept your credit, right? Yep. Just, you did have a part to play. Even if you are the leader, even if you are trying to facilitate others, you had a part to play. And if someone's acknowledging it, be gracious and accept that acknowledgement, right? Receive it. Now, the flip side of that is when you're not acknowledged, when someone is taking your contributions and not reflecting, representing, or attributing, right? Not citing their sources. How have you overcome that? How do you handle that? And what are a couple more tips, tricks?
Yeah, there are a lot. Yeah, that's something I talk a lot about with women friends, because it's real. These are not scenes from a movie. These things happen every single day in conference rooms. So I think, there's a technique called voice amplification. It's really fascinating. Google voice amplification and Obama administration. I won't bore you with the whole story, but the women in Obama's cabinet banded together because they were experiencing the same phenomenon as well, where their ideas were overlooked or appropriated, where they weren't invited to the meetings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They banded together and lifted each other's voices. So someone would try to take credit for one woman's idea or paper or whatever it was. The other women would be her allies in this case and say, hold on a second, Jim, Sarah was actually the one, in whatever professional capacity they had to say it. Instead of tearing him down, they would redirect the credit where it was actually due. So I think communities of empowerment are really important here. And, that goes right back to not only listening, but finding our voice and gathering women, our women allies and our women friends and our women colleagues to support each other. This Lauren Rotolo 2 sessions ago spoke up and said, everybody has a voice. All you need is your voice and your brain. It is incredibly difficult. I understand this. I've been here so many times when something like that happens and you have to speak up on your own behalf because, your women coterie isn't around you at that particular time. But like everything in life, it gets easier with practice. You have to do it once, break the seal, even in a very small way. Baby steps. I'm a big advocate of baby steps, because once you do something in a small capacity, it becomes easier to expand that capacity next time. So it is important for us to be our own advocates, and there isn't much wiggle room around that. We have to do it sometimes, but communities of women too, of empowered women, are also very, very helpful. So there is support out there for sure.
Yeah, I think that's one that a lot of people have to embrace. If you have to embrace that you have a superpower, understand it, learn it, and then you have to be prepared to be your own superhero, right? Because
exactly,
you may be the only and the lonely in a situation, and coming from an intersectional identity myself, it's really one of those things I can embrace, being the only and sometimes the lonely in spaces, and having some insecurity about my own voice in certain situations, certain circumstances, to where you start doing things that aren't necessarily naturally your best self, right?
Mm-hmm.
Covering, code switching, like shielding yourself, and I know that when we look at the demographics, that we've seen some change. We've seen some evolution across industry, and we're seeing the C-suites become more diverse, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that diversity hasn't necessarily gone beyond gender, right? And we got a long way to go. But how do you feel, or what can you suggest as ways to diversify not just the leadership in these organizations, but the demography of that leadership, not just women, but women of color as well, because often women of color are looking for white women to show up and stand up and be those advocates and ambassadors. Maybe you have some tips on perspective there that you can share.
I sure do. Listen, empowerment, again, in my mind, as I mentioned, it starts with an individual. And in this case, in this question, it is about a woman like me, a white woman in the C-suite somewhere like that. I need to understand that I need to take personal responsibility for my privilege. And I think there are very important, mundane ways in which the people at the top can learn, grow, and change, and help be catalysts for change and uplift the people, particularly marginalized people, quote unquote, below them. I was thinking about this today. How about starting with, we all diversify the accounts we follow on social media, read a different book about a different perspective, watch a movie with a different protagonist, have a conversation with someone that doesn't look, talk, or act like you. This is not difficult to find. Most of us don't live, down a dirt lane on a country road somewhere in the middle of nowhere. We live in societies. So that's the very beginning of the personal responsibility I'm talking about. And it's certainly exponentially increases from there. So speaking up on behalf of other women, again, it's a responsibility. And I say women again, that's my default always, but speaking up on behalf of other folks that may be marginalized or whose voices may not be getting heard. Those are very, very important things to do. And again, as we just discussed, on your own behalf or on behalf of someone else, it's not always the most comfortable thing. Well, guess what? Growth, change, and evolution, it isn't comfortable. So baby steps, practice, and you'll get there. I also think I've emphasized this a few times, but I'm a community builder. I'm a collaborator. I think we have strength in numbers. So I think having these discussions among diverse groups of people is another important thing, discussing openly. And so many of our speakers, prior to our conversation, have said a version of the same thing, where it can be messy. It doesn't have to, nobody has all the right answers. We can all take a deep breath and have a real authentic conversation. And that helps uplift everyone, in my opinion.
Not the numbers, baby steps,
yep.
Tiny habits, and personal responsibility. I think those are all bullet points that we can take. We had a tidal wave of these points of views about allyship. There's tons of resources out there if people want to deepen their own allyship. One of the things that I learned, and it was from a woman of color who, for lack of had a very unique story. The point of the story was that proximity doesn't necessarily make you an ally, right? You're not an ally because I got somebody in my family that insert, right? You're an ally when you better understand the challenges that those folks face and can be an ambassador for those challenges and help solve those challenges when they're with you, but even more so when they're not. Right. And that's where individuals I've heard about the challenging conversations that people have had in the last 18 months with family members. Like they haven't talked to their grandparents in months, maybe even a year, because they got raw about perspectives and points of view and whether it's traditional gender roles or gender association or facts versus fiction versus opinions versus. But it's in these moments, these real personal one-on-one moments that change can take place. It means that each of us do have a responsibility to be that catalyst, like you said, to be that catalyst for change and recognize relative privilege, right? Like in certain spaces, some people have privilege where others don't. And I realize that as a Black man in America, do I have the same privilege as my white counterparts? No. But I do have some relative privilege in relation to others that aren't as economically privileged or didn't have the educational opportunities or didn't have any range of circumstances. We have to be out there and active for others that don't have as much to justify what we have and keep it. At least that's how I feel. But
I love it. I love that so much. And again, it just is everything you just said is such a great reminder that allyship and just change, societal change, it's not so far away. It's not so vaunted that it's out of reach, because where it really happens is in the fabric of day-to-day life. And I can't emphasize that enough. It's micro level change is the harbinger of real societal change. One other good example, I read this along the way somewhere. The actress Jessica Chastain often stars with the actress Octavia Spencer, I believe are their names. The one woman, Jessica Chastain, is white. Octavia Spencer is Black. Jessica Chastain used her privilege and said, I'm going to negotiate with Octavia Spencer for our pay for every movie we do together as a unit so that they were paid equally. I thought that was, this is Hollywood. They were talking bazillions of dollars, I'm sure, but still just on that micro scale, two women effected incredible change in an industry where pay is huge. So I couldn't agree with everything you said, Lauren. I love it.
That's great. This was a fantastic conversation, Leanne, and I'm really glad that this brought us together. And I don't expect that we'll drift apart as a result of this conversation being over with. I look forward to our next dialogue and conversation. There have been a great number of talking points here. Hopefully everyone that joined in and participated has a few things that they can take with them to arrows to add to their quiver, as it were, because we're all in this fight together. Are there any parting shots that you want to leave before we turn it back over to the MCs?
Yeah, one tiny last thing. And again, this thread has been woven through a few of the other conversations I listened to today. Started talking about active listening as kind of a centerpiece to an empowered voice and just generally, garnering change in this world. And I also mentioned there's like a really nice energy exchange when that happens authentically. There's also something there about just being a nice person, being kind, being interested in other people. I know that's very simplistic, but I have found in my life, I've had some incredible interactions and conversations with people when I took the time to chat with, someone in my neighborhood or somebody at Starbucks, something like that. So have your opportunity goggles on for ways to interact with people. And often the hinge to that, or the bridge to that, is just being kind of an open, nice, smiling, kind person. That's my Pollyanna closure here, but I believe in it. So I had to share that.
All right. So I'm going to share one last thing before we turn it over, and it's a holiday season's greeting sort of story. I think it's important. So we received several packages, because it's the holiday season, and some of these packages were addressed to someone else at an address that's somewhere between ours and our neighbors. So they would have just been sitting in between our houses, but they brought them to our door, and it was 4 deliveries in the last week. So my wife was like, I've got to find out who this individual is. I got to track him down, called twice, didn't get an answer. The third time, she's like, third attempt, third time's a charm, or I'm keeping all this Chanel. She answers and she's like, and the woman that answers the phone, she basically says, oh my gosh, I can't believe you reached out. We were prepared to send her gifts or take them to their destination. And she's like, I've been through it with Amazon. I've been through it with so-and-so. I've been through it with FedEx. I got all my money back. They're yours. Keep them. So literally out of the sky drops lots of great fragrances and gifts. But the story there is that, you know, like you said, just do good, be kind, think about some others and what they might be going through, and treat them with the same grace and patience and empathy and consideration that you would treat yourself or the people you love. And these are the kind of things that happen. Like, we still have room to be empathetic, to be human, to love one another, to care for each other. And if we do that, we will accelerate all this change that we've been talking about since George Floyd. So, Leanne, thank you. High five,
Thank you, Myron.
handshakes, the whole nine.
High five. This is so awesome. I don't want to
Awesome.
stop, Jessie. We're not getting off. We're going to keep the conversation going.
Please do. No, we'll have to have you both back. That was such an awesome conversation. Really appreciate you both taking the time out of your day. And that was such a really touch on so many topics and so many important things. So I really appreciate you both coming on.
Pleasure's ours.
Awesome.
Take care.
Thanks so much, y'all. All right. Up next, we have our final panel of the day. It's been so impressive seeing all these panelists up on stage, and really excited for this last chat. So without much further ado, I'm so excited to introduce Amelia Hardy, the Vice President of Strategic Community Engagement and External Partnerships at Best Buy, and her moderator, Debbie Ellison, the Global Chief Digital Officer for VMLY and our Commerce as well. So thank you so much. Welcome, and so excited to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you, Jessie.
Awesome. I'll let you two take it away.
I can't hear you, Debbie, even though I'm sure what you're saying is wonderful.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
We good? Okay, but you're now on mute, Amelia. I was
hear me now.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Right. The tech is in our favor today. Right. I was just saying a huge thank you to Myron, King, and Leanne. That was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much. And I love that kind of parting shot. Just be kind, just be nice, embrace the smiles and embrace people, and just reach out to, you know, other people who are not like you, to kind of just understand a different world than the one that you're in. So thank you, Myron. Thank you, Leanne. Welcome, everyone. As Jessie was saying, I'm Debbie Ellison. I'm the Global Chief Digital Officer of VMLY and our Commerce. I am so excited today to have a discussion with the phenomenal Amelia Hardy, who's the VP of Strategic Community Engagement at Best Buy. We've got so much to talk about today. I'm super excited. 4 key themes that we kind of want to cover off, that we believe are driving business transformation forward, and that will really, I think, set businesses up for the future in the best way. So a changing approach to leadership, what's happening in that space, market innovation, sustainability, and of course, DE&I. We'd love for you to play a part in this conversation. We do want it to be an open forum, so please do ask questions. I'm going to try and do my best as moderator to multitask and include as many questions as we navigate the topic areas. Amelia, thank you so much for joining us today. We are the last, as Jessie was saying, the last in the day, so we've got the best spot. Yeah. Before we get started, I would love for you to kind of introduce yourself to our audience, talk about your extraordinary career and your background, and also your role now at Best Buy.
Yes, thank you so much, Debbie. I'd love to introduce myself. Hello, everyone. My name is Amelia Hardy. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Community Engagement at Best Buy. And my career path has been unconventional. My background is in marketing and business administration. And I've had roles at Fortune 100 companies for the last 2 decades in business development and marketing and new product development and category management and P&L management. But all at the same time, leading with a lens of equity and making that imperative in everything that I do. So over the past 18 months, we all know what has gone on, and I'm in Minneapolis, St. Paul. So in our own backyard, we had the atrocity of the murder of George Floyd and of Dante Wright, and before that, Philando Castile, and many names that deserve to be named. And with that, I pivoted my career into diversity, equity, and inclusion, and really leading strategic initiatives for that and making those goals imperative in our organization at Best Buy. After that 9 months, I turned outward to do more community engagement and external partnerships and sustainability and ESG. So it's been a great ride, I would say, always using the skills of strategy, consumer insights, what people need, with a lens of equities. That's been my career journey thus far. And like I said, I took a pivot, and many times I've had to take the road that I didn't think I would take, but the path not most traveled or the path that I didn't think would be traveled is usually the path that sometimes turns out the best for me. So I'm so happy to be on this path now and doing the work that I'm doing.
Thank you, Amelia. And there's lots of things that you've touched on actually that we are going to pull back in and deep dive into. But one of the things I kind of want to move into the first topic, right? The first theme that we were going to cover off, and that's around leadership. You've done so many roles, and to your point, you've pivoted across many different type of roles in your career, and you've mentioned some of those events that have kind of moved you and pivoted you into more of a space around DE&I and equity. And history does show us that fundamental changes in business often happen at the back of big global events. More so now we're experiencing, as you well know, than ever before. And what we're seeing are leaders having to seriously pivot, as you were saying, their leadership style to navigate that fast-paced change, societal change and technology landscape. And it's no surprise that there will be long-term implications and effects of everything that's been happening, all the events that you talked to, the pandemic, on global businesses. Can you talk a little bit about what's changed most in your leadership style? And I'm focusing on you for the moment, on your leadership style, like these past kind of 18 months as you have made that pivot yourself. And how have you navigated those needs of your own people and also to Best Buy customers?
I'd say over the last 18 months with COVID and racial unrest, we've seen an unprecedented change in people using technology, and that's Best Buy's purpose to enhance people's lives with the use of technology, whether that's from remote working to telemed visits to connections with your family members. That has been the purpose of Best Buy, to provide those services and products to our customers and communities to stay connected in new and different ways. And for me, that's no different. I've been connected in new and different ways, but my focus, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily changed, but I've started to really be hyper-focused on equity and inclusion. And I say that because, again, COVID and racial unrest has laid bare all the inequities that especially BIPOC or people of color are experiencing. And, it's a very diverse world, but when you talk about equity and do people have what they need, the resources, the opportunities to thrive, not only to just survive, but to thrive. I've started to look at that, not just equality, not everybody getting the same thing, but what do we need to do to eliminate that gap and eradicate the gap? And then inclusion. You can have diverse perspectives at the table, but if you don't acknowledge them, if you don't respect them, if people don't feel like they belong or they're valued or heard, then that is all for naught. You don't take advantage of the diversity that you have. So from a leadership perspective, I've really looked at how do I help everyone be their best self? How do I help myself be my best self, my peers, my colleagues, my team members? What are the things that we need to do for our customers and for our employees and for our communities to make it so that the playing field is more level? So I would say, like, I've just been hyper focused. I don't know if I've changed. I feel like I'm very much still a servant leader and looking for ways to make an impact and difference, but maybe shifted or pivoted a little bit, again, at that word pivot, to focus more so on the equity and inclusion part of it, really the equity part of it right now in the community work that I'm doing. Also, while acknowledging that diversity, is good. That's the first step to get diverse perspectives into the room.
And I think what's really interesting, Amelia, at least what I'm seeing from our own business and from other businesses, is that, our people are demanding that now, right? So to your point, like, the leadership is pivoting, but it's also, there is a pull from our people, there is a pull from our clients to make sure that we are driving that actionable change, right? You and I had kind of spoken about that. It's not just enough to be talking about it or to be creating ERGs, but actually, how are you driving that business transformation that's going to create those spaces that you talk about? So I mean, just to kind of add to that conversation, I think that what I'm loving to see is that not only leaders are changing how they're leading, but actually the people within organizations are now starting to demand a different environment, they're demanding differently from their leaders as well. So I'd love to talk to you a bit more about kind of that actionable change. What are some of the programs and initiatives that, Best Buy, you've seen at Best Buy, or that you've led, that you feel are really making an impact to the business?
Yeah, I mean, we know that employees and customers are saying that we want purpose-driven businesses and organizations. It's not just about making money, but about being aware and having a voice in social issues, and making sure, again, that everyone is able to thrive. And so at Best Buy, we're in Minneapolis, St. Paul headquartered, and with the murder of George Floyd, our CEO, Corey Berry, said, we will do better. And what she meant by that is we'll do better for our corporation, for our company, for our employees, for our people, for our customers and our communities, and for our country. And we've done that by really looking at our commitments to our people, making sure that people have training and development, mentors and sponsors. We've also had a task force. I lead an enterprise task force where we take leaders through an immersive experience to be inclusive leaders, to give them the tools that they need to make sure that everyone feels that they're in an equitable space, a psychologically safe space, and have the opportunity to thrive. We're also making sure that we are targeting to have 1 out of 3 new hires be people of color, and also looking at gender in our D&T, or digital and technology space, as well as our field. We're making sure that we keep the talent that we have. So we're looking at retention goals and having retention at parity. We're very active in the community as well. We have teen tech centers that kind of teach and provide safe spaces for kids to learn, to code, to make videos, to sing, to take pictures. We have about 30 of those now, and we're targeting 100. So there are many things that we're doing that I'm a part of, that my colleagues are a part of, that all of Best Buy is a part of, to really give back to the community, to support our employees, and to meet the needs of our customers.
I really love to hear that, Amelia. There's so many things that you and I had spoken about. It's so many programs and initiatives that you are absolutely leading and creating real business impact, as you say, not just for your people, but also for the community and for your customers. One of the things that I'm picking up on, of course, because you're at Best Buy, is that reference to digital and technology, and that moves us into the next theme around kind of innovation. So not just innovation in leadership, but innovation as in technology innovation. And I was going to say, as we emerge from the pandemic, and I think that's a little bit hopeful. I'm dialed in from London, and things are changing really quickly, but we are seeing 2 different sets of behaviors from brands and from retailers. Those that are about self-preservation, right? And all about kind of defending their share of market that they've had pre-pandemic. But also what we're also seeing is that emergence of businesses and organizations that are innovating their way out of it, whether that's through the introduction of AR, VR, facilitating in-home shopping experiences that drive to direct consumer and e-commerce, using AI to, you know, predict buying trends and analyzing kind of what people are going to be wanting to buy next and how they're going to want to buy it. And all of that, of course, is driven through technology, through digital channels. And if that explosion of, I guess, technology innovation continues, is there a risk that we're losing that human connection, that connection to people, everything that you're talking about around community? Where do you see that play out?
Our purpose at Best Buy is to enrich lives through technology. And that truly means to be a partner with people, to meet them where they're at, to meet their needs. I think when you talk about innovation, it could be innovation in many different ways. Innovation in the way you reach customers, making sure that you reach them where they're at. We've been always focused on omnichannel, but with COVID, we've had to definitely accelerate into more of an online environment and trying different things with stores. All about customer needs and changing customer perspectives, allowing people to shop when and where they want to, where they need to, allowing people to get their products how they want to. You can pick them up at the store. You can go in and pick it up. You can have someone bring it to your car. You can get something same day. You can have something shipped to you. So I think the innovation is also about the shift of the business model to meet the needs and the changing needs of our consumers. And that's what we've been focused on, the customer experience and making sure that we are delivering on that and making sure our customers have a good experience when shopping with us and have options. So to the way we curate our products, again, our website experience, our experience when you're in our stores, all of that to me can be very innovative in the way that you approach it, and definitely very agile and adaptive. We have to be adaptable, as things are changing.
Completely. And do you see, and I'm sure you'll say yes, but I'd love to explore it, like where are the role of people in all of that? A lot of what you've spoken to quite rightly is, the role of the website, the role of, click and collect and different ways through technology that we can get products to customers. But where is do you have any thoughts about, the people, that connection that many brands and retailers are maybe forgetting about?
Well, we leaned directly into our Blue Shirts and our Geek Squad agents. The people in the stores, they're our front line, and they're doing great things every day to service our customers. And that's the first touch point. So when you talk about that human aspect of it, that is where it's at. It's our Blue Shirts meeting the needs of customers in store. It's our in-home consultants. It's our Geek Squad agents who come in and help you with repairs. So we're very much about the human aspect of it, the human touch of it, the service aspect of it, and meeting our customers. We're not just a website portal. We are very much a comprehensive, collaborative approach to business and our customers and meeting customer needs. From the community side of it, we are teaching kids how to use technology, and that's a very human thing. How do they use technology to get the careers that they need or want to enhance their lives, to support their livelihoods and their family in the future? So to me, that's very human. And then we use technology to eradicate disparities. Telemedicine is a good way that it helps, the accessibility of healthcare. You can monitor patients that are not mobile from their homes. So to me, it's the perfect marriage, if you will, of technology and humanity. It's not one taking over the other, but the use of humans using technology. We're using technology to help, to advance causes, to eradicate disparities. So that's how I think we're approaching it. It's a perfect marriage and an integration of the two.
I really love that. I love that, Amelia, because it goes back to the point you were making around inclusion, and sometimes digital and technology can feel so exclusive, right, to certain groups of people, to certain demographics. So everything that you speak to around, again, like educating the young in this space, or using your blue squad, I think that's what you call them, right? To help.
Blue shirts, yes.
Blue shirts, right? The blue shirts to help.
In the Geek Squad.
Navigate. Like I love that. And I think it's one of the reasons kind of why I kind of entered this space of kind of digital and technology, because I just felt as though if we weren't careful, the industry were going to start to exclude groups of people. And what I love about the explosion of e-commerce and direct to consumer is, you know what, like it doesn't matter where you come from or what you do, like you can start your own business, you can start and run, you know, your social channels and set up a direct consumer platform and run your business in a way that actually is equitable, right? Like, you know, is open to different types of people. So that's what I love is demystifying digital and technology for all. And I think everything that you had spoken to kind of really speaks to that as well, which I really love. Like it's a passion point of mine. So I'm going to shush before I get on a soapbox.
Oh, please keep going. Drop in some lessons for us.
Yeah, like I you know, like as I said, like I do feel really passionate about it because I think it can feel quite scary, this space of kind of digital and technology for people. You know, and there are certain, I guess, assumptions about who can and cannot get involved in technology, who can and cannot get involved in the digital space. And I really feel like it is my passion point to break those barriers down, to say, actually, no, you know, you can be a mum and you can look after your kids and you can still run a business from home and you can still set up, you know, an e-commerce site, you can still learn how to run your social channels, you know. And again, for older people, you know, that assumption that older people don't know, you know, technology. And I'm like, well, they absolutely do. So, you know, all the initiatives that you've spoken to and making sure, you know, in my role, making sure that, you know, all of those things, technology innovations can be really understood by people because it isn't really that complicated, and making that accessible to all, I think loops back into everything that you were saying also around kind of the inclusion space, right? How do we make sure that people feel comfortable, not just in their work environment, but also in how they access the work environment, how they access data and technology also. So I'm going to
yeah, no, I mean, I think it's about technology as an enabler and not as something that's scary or is going to take over, but how does it enable us to do the things that we want to do, to service our customers, to serve our community, to eradicate the disparities, to make things more accessible and you know, and equitable to people. So I think it really is about focusing on technology as an enabler for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And some of the things that we have, you know, some of the topics that we've already spoken about around people's change in values, right? As we're in the midst of the pandemic, you know, off the back of some of the events that have happened, like we are seeing a huge shift in what people value, right? And we'll talk about kind of DE&I in a second and kind of, you know, what you're doing in that space. But one of the areas that we're seeing that is in the space of sustainability, right? So of course, you know, we're trying to get through the pandemic, but people haven't forgotten that there is a climate crisis, and they're also driving and wanting, you know, some answers around the sustainability agenda. And, you know, most global brands are carving out their own response. We're helping a lot of global brands do that, and defining what their commitment should be, authentically what their commitment should be, reflecting that consumer demand. But, you know, we've seen some statistics that there is that shift for consumers and people wanting to see brands do better in this space. And I'd love to hear about what is Best Buy doing around marketing, you know, business transformation in the sustainability space, and again, some of the programs and initiatives that you're driving to kind of meet that consumer demand.
We are totally all in on ESG, our environment and social and governance practices. You know, it is a way that we do business. We have a target to be net zero by 2040, and we are cutting emissions. We're changing over our Geek Squad fleet to hybrid models. We're looking at different ways of using energy, so solar and wind. We're looking at water and waste reduction, our packaging. We're looking at ways we can recycle more. We are the #1 recycler of electronics, in the United States. So there are many things that we're doing. It's a way of business for us. And we are always looking at how do we make sure, like our CEO, Corey Berry, says she wants to leave the world a better place than what it was when she came in. And that is the purpose of the purpose of our vision and how we do business. So it is looking at what is our footprint, what is the impact of that footprint, and what can we do to make sure that it's a positive impact at the end of the day versus negative. It affects us all. I think we all see what is happening with climate change and other things. So it's a business imperative for us. And, I would like to say that it's been a business imperative for a while. It's not a trendy thing for us, but it is a way that we do business, a way that we think about our business model.
And Amelia, do you think there are challenges in communicating that to your customers? Like one of the, we're embarking on some global research, albeit with Gen Zers around their shifting attitudes towards sustainability and DE&I, and without revealing too much on the results of that research, they are expecting brands to help them, realize their aspirations for a more inclusive world, a more sustainable world. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that and where that's being communicated, because it's really important that your customers see that too, and whether you see that there are any challenges in driving that communication with them.
I think, social and cause marketing is always an interesting thing. You want to do it in an authentic way, in a way that shows that you really do care, and not a way to exploit in any way. So what I would say about Best Buy and our efforts, we talk about what we're doing. I mean, we're kind of humble. We call it the Minnesota Nice aspect of it. We talk about it when it's relevant to talk about it to our customers and our communities. But there are, like Earth Day, we will communicate the things that we're doing, again, our recycling program and how our customers can recycle their electronics. So we're talking about it in that way from, how is it going to help you? How can you participate in it? How can you be a part of it? And especially with our employees, like how do we as employees continue to drive the things on our corporate campus and what we do for our own personal footprint? So that's more how we see it. And I think it's just a tricky thing of how you communicate. We do more, I would think, probably organically. If we're out and about in the community and we're doing interviews or talking to people or through our public relations team, but always in a way that's going to be helpful and beneficial to the community and our customers, and hopefully never in a braggadocious way or a way that anyone would feel that we're not authentic, because we're very much authentic and sold on needing to continue to make sure that our footprint is not a negative impact, it's a positive impact.
And the fact, Amelia, that you mentioned that, this isn't a recent response that you've been leading and Best Buy has been leading, but actually this has been a longer term journey for you guys, I think adds credibility and authenticity to that message, right? I just felt like it was super interesting that, as I said, when we had kind of done that research with Gen Zers, they were wanting more from brands to kind of communicate that, because they hadn't researched, they don't go out and actively search that information in the large, which was a real surprise to me. But as I said, I don't want to give too much away from that research, but I do think it's really interesting to see how brands and retailers are communicating those messages around sustainability to get that message out to their consumers, their customers, around all the great things that they're doing. So we've spoken a lot. We've spoken about leadership, we've spoken about innovation, we've spoken about sustainability. I do want to loop back into something that you touched on that I know is so important to both of us, around kind of diversity, inclusion, and equity. And you'd mentioned it when you did your intro, that the murder of George Floyd and you know, subsequent events pivoted you into the D&I space, right? And you were quoted, and I hope you don't mind because I'm going to read this word for word, in a thought piece that was published. The community is more accepting of corporations being in this type of work and purpose driven, which I absolutely agree with, by the way. You were energized, or I was energized and inspired by people from multiple backgrounds, communities and companies getting involved. That made me optimistic about being able to come into the role to drive change, building upon all the good work that the I&D team had started. I'd love for you to go back to that and talk through a bit more of that DE&I journey, and maybe also lean into some of the challenges and some of the frustrations that you might have had and pivoted, because there'll be people that would be listening to this who are only just starting their journey, right? And kind of would want to learn from all the great things that you've been doing. So I'd love to hear more about that, Amelia.
I think that the DEI journey is my life. It's a lived experience for me. You know, my parents grew up in the segregated South and have often told me stories of the open discrimination, very transparent and blatant discrimination that they grew up with, that their parents faced, that my grandparents faced. And so that was always top of mind to me, those stories and what they dealt with. And then I grew up in a pretty segregated suburb of Kansas City. And my experience from a young age was also people saying you're different, your hair is different, why is one side of your hand light and the other is dark? You know, all of that, or you're smart for a Black girl. So it is my lived experience. It is not only a journey that I'm in for just academics or because it is the right thing to do, and it is, but it's because I have lived it. My family has lived it. My kids live it. And so that's why I'm so passionate about it. And from an early age, when I realized that I was different, people saw me as different, and that different wasn't always good for them. They saw that as not equal. So from a very young age, I started in middle school, a diversity club. I worked with our local NAACP on making sure that the school district was being equitable with its Black, Hispanic, Latinx, and Indigenous students. Making all of that has been, again, my lived experience and my passion, and followed that through high school and into attending a historically Black college and university in New Orleans, always knowing that I want to make a change. I want to change that story, that narrative for my kids, for their kids. And my ancestors have given much, many have given much, but I feel that that's what I owe and what I need to do, but also I live it, and it is my life. It is my burden every day. Because of that, I didn't necessarily want to get into a diversity and equity and inclusion position, because it was something that I already did. It was something that I was already passionate about. It's something that I already lived. And so it was hard for me at first to think that I would do that full time, because I was already doing it full time. So how do you do something double full time? I don't know. But what I've come to realize during the murder, after the murder of George Floyd, living in Minneapolis, St. Paul, there was, we went to George Floyd Square. I took my oldest daughter to a protest. And I looked around and said, wow, this is a beautiful thing, because we were one of the very few Black people there. There were so many different allies there of different races, of different ethnicities, of different beliefs. And in that moment, I said, I'm very hopeful. I'm very hopeful for the change that is to come, because these people might not necessarily be their lived experience, but they're empathizing and they're taking on the call to do something different. And with that, again, the pivot in my thinking of what better than now to align my passion, my purpose, my lived experience with my profession. And so that brings me to where I am today. But I do it because I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's my purpose. I think it's the impact that I need to make in this world. I think it is something that I'm doing for future generations. And I truly believe that Best Buy, the leadership at Best Buy, the employees at Best Buy, they believe in it and they want to do better and they want to make a difference. So I couldn't imagine a better place to be doing that work now, and also in the community of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and our greater community. It's much needed. And, you know, the work is a lot and sometimes the workers are few, but it's something I'm dedicated to. My team is dedicated to, the company is dedicated to. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I just wanted to say, like, it is, and we've talked about this, it doesn't shut off for us, it is our life. And I want to make it so that other people have better experience than my grandparents, than my parents, and that I've had, and in some instances my kids have had. You know, I unfortunately say that my kids have had some experiences in their school, and I did not think I'd be talking about this with my own kids, but maybe they won't have to do the same thing with their kids. There's always the hope that the next generation will continue to get better and we will continue to be more accepting of one another.
And you're right, Amelia, you and I think bonded over this conversation, right, as a pre-chat to this one, because it's the same thing that drives me, right? You know, everyone will say, you're a global CDO, you know, what are you doing talking about DE&I? And it's exactly as you say, it's like sharing those lived experiences. Our conversation isn't over yet, but it's important to have these conversations, to share that lived experience, right? And I think for me especially, the experiences that my children still have, and you touched upon that, you know, the doors that are shut because of the color of their skin, you know, for me, it breaks your heart as a mother, right? Because it's something that you can't change for them, you can't fix for them. And so, you know, if any, you know, for the people that's dialed into this call today, you know, I really implore you to use your influence, use the power that you have within the organization, like Amelia is doing, like I am trying to do, to really set up those programs, set up those initiatives to drive education, to drive action, to make a change. Because to Amelia's point, like, we don't want our children to have the same conversation and trying to create a more equitable world for their children. Like, we want this to be done now. Like, you know, we want, I will share with you something personal. You know, my daughter had a really awful experience, and she said, she's 25 years older than me, and she said, I don't have the fight in me, and I don't have it in me anymore. And I was just like, it's heartbreaking to hear that. And so I think for all of us, be that ally, use your influence. I keep saying it, use the power, whatever power that you have to make that change in your organization, to make that change in your workplace, in your community, and add to that fight, help that fight. It's so important, because it is life-changing. And I think to everything, Amelia, you were saying, it's not a tick box. We're not doing this for some CSR award or credit. We're doing this because we fundamentally believe that this is what needs to happen to drive transformation for our communities, for our people, for our business. And that is absolutely, you know, when we're talking about business transformation, for me, I fundamentally believe and I'm passionate that the D&I space is the space that's going to keep also business future fit. We have to reflect the people that we serve, the communities that we serve, and that's becoming ever more so diverse. And we have to create the spaces and places that people feel comfortable in, that they can, to Amelia's point, thrive in, not just survive in, but thrive in, and really deliver against their potential. So again, like it's something that I'm hugely passionate about, hugely emotional about. And I think there are a lot of people that think, you know, these things don't happen nowadays, but they do. And the murder of George Floyd showed that. And the microaggressions that happen day in, day out still happen. So we've really got to lean in, and we've really got to do everything that we can to change that.
I agree. And that's the power of allies and sponsors and those activists, those who are in it with you, because it is very exhausting work for those who live it and then those who are allies. And alone, we cannot do it. We cannot make the impact solely by ourselves, but collectively, you know, the more that we get people to lean into it and make it an imperative, that's how we start to drive the larger sustainable change. We need this to be sustainable, not a moment in time, but a movement. And that is what it's all about. So that the fight is not for naught, that it continues to drive that sustainable change from moment to moment, from day to day, from year to year, month to month, from year to year, from generation to generation. And that is my hope. So tell your daughter to hang in there. There are many that are in the fight with her and are supporting her. And we are moving forward. We have no choice but to move forward.
Exactly that. So I'm going to use the word again, Amelia. I'm going to pivot slightly, because I do want to go back into a space around the business, because everything that I've been talking about around D&I, around sustainability, absolutely. I genuinely believe is a business imperative as well as a people imperative, an inclusion imperative. And I do talk a lot about inclusion kind of being that business imperative, because we need to represent the people that we're serving, right? The communities that we're serving. And I want to move into this space of commerce, and more we're seeing brands, platforms, retailers really trying to keep customers in their ecosystem. And of course, that has absolutely been the case, especially over the last 18 to 24 months, whereas you had quite rightly said, we're moving into this digital first ecosystem, right? And there's lots more that we can do to serve people and communities. I'd like maybe for you to talk about what are the touch points, what are the channels that have really resonated with your customers, that's really working for them? How have you kept your customers engaged over the last 18 to 24 months? And I'd love also for you to maybe share your own personal opinion about some other brands that have been doing it well as well, which are the ones that you admire. Because as I said, all of this is around creating more personalized, more relevant commerce experiences when we're talking about sustainability and D&I. But let's talk about channels and touch points. What is working for Best Buy at the moment?
Question. Like I said, we've always leaned into our omni-channel presence. So anywhere we want to meet our customers where they're at, where they're shopping, whether that's online or in store. We want to make sure that they have the best experience. I think we've pivoted very quickly to our e-commerce platform, but also like our blue shirts, our Geek Squad agents, our in-home consultants, that has always worked well for us. That is an integral part of our business model, to offer that white glove, high touch service, to be there when you have a question, I think is, and to be able to adjust, right? If you're talking to someone face-to-face in store, you can ask them questions to help them get to the right product or a right service. I think we do that well. I think we look at our customer needs. We walk through the buying process with them, and we also offer service after they buy a product from us. So I think our holistic approach to what we call a customer obsessed culture is working well for us. And then many kudos go to like our blue shirts, our Geek Squad agents, all those who are in the field, our customer experience team, our marketing teams, like everyone, supply chain, everyone is coming together to be customer obsessed and meet our customers where they're at. And I think that works. I think it works when you do things that work for your customers, understand their needs, and then deliver upon that.
I love that, Amelia. And I've got the $1 million question, which is, you're doing that super successfully. Where are the opportunities to grow? What do you see for Best Buy in 2022 and beyond? Where is the next frontier for you guys?
I mean, I think that we have to understand our changing demographics of our customers, understand those needs, and continue to meet them where they're at. That could be everything from how we curate products and services to how we show up online and social or whatnot. I mean, if our Best Buy, we're going to continue to be agile and vigilant. quickly adapting to our customer needs and changing environments. We're going to be purpose-driven, as we have before, like I said, leaving the world a better place than in which we came into it, and making sure we are making a positive impact. We're going to center and focus on DEI as imperative to our business model. And most of all, we're going to take care of ourselves, each other, our customers, and communities. So that's our future. That's our way forward, to be people obsessed, whether that's our employees, whether that's our communities, whether that's our customers. I think that is what it is. That is the way forward.
Exactly. You can't go wrong with that strategy. I see Jessie's popped up. So Jessie, I'm just going to wrap up because I'm sure that's our signal. Amelia, I just want to thank you so much for your time today. It's just been such an honor to be connected and to have the conversation that we've had today. And it's been brilliant to hear about all the fantastic things that you and Best Buy are doing to deliver that business transformation and to your point, staying relevant with today's consumers. And there's so many things that I've learned personally around kind of the themes that we've covered off: leadership, sustainability, DE&I, innovation. And I kind of would like to ask you one last question. And given those themes that we have covered off, is there one key takeout that you'd like our audience to have, or one thing to think about that they should be thinking about as they embrace 2022?
I would just say that, we've had many famous people say it, but be the change you want to see. Everybody can be people obsessed, can be obsessed about your employees, your peers, your community, your customers. I think we have to put humanity first, as you said, and be kind and look for ways to be allies and move forward in a positive way. So that's what I would say. I think that centers on everything.
It's a lovely way to end our conversation, and I completely agree. Thank you so much again. Thank you,
Debbie.
Tuned in. Have a really wonderful rest of day or evening wherever you are in the world.
Thank you, everyone.
Jessie.
Yes. Awesome. Debbie, Amelia, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your time. And it was awesome to hear your conversation. Hope you both have an awesome day.
Bye-bye. Thank you. You too. Have a good day.
Thanks, y'all. So that means we are wrapping up here. I want to thank all of our amazing speakers and moderators who are here with us today. D&I is such a fantastic subject, and we really appreciate everyone's honesty, candidness, really heartfelt conversations, some laughs. So really want to thank everyone for being here. Please join us for tomorrow for our next live cast, Women in Marketing. We'll be kicking off at 12 p.m. Eastern. Look forward to seeing you all there. And without much further ado, have a good day. Thanks, everyone.